Well, you saw the title, you clicked on the video. Now the only thing to do is to head over to the official Top 250 Narrative Feature Films list on Letterboxd, go to the very end, and look at the very first movie, which is an anime film I have never heard of, Kazumo no Gatari Part 3 Raikaketsu from 2017. Of course, I feel a little bit of a sting of shame each time I haven't heard of one of these movies on such an illustrious list, but the reality is that this video is probably going to be pretty long, so any film I can skip over is great news. We'll talk about anime maybe more, and if I have any thoughts on it, but let's just skip right past this movie to 249, which is An Autumn Afternoon, directed by Ozu. I've never seen this movie. We'll probably come to more Ozu films further up the list, and we'll talk about them more. Number 248, Kwai. We have 3 Japanese films in a row, which is interesting. You wonder if that's setting the tone for the rest of this list. I have not looked at the Letterboxd Top 250 Narrative Feature Films list for about 2 years, so I don't know what we're getting into here. A couple years ago, I did a video like this where I did the IMDb Top 250. Took 5.5 hours. You can check it out on the channel. That was a lot of fun. I'm interested to see how this compares. Well, I'll talk about that maybe a little bit more as we go on, but let's stick to business here. We're talking about Kwai. I have seen this movie. It's a triptych, 3-part film, really groovy. It's 1964. It's an interesting time in Japanese cinema because it's a time of radical modern cinema, but it's also still traditional Japanese cinema in some ways, and Kwai really embodies that as a movie that is visually extremely striking, but also fairly traditional in its format, in the way it's sort of filmed on a lot of sets, and on the way that it's based around sort of parables and these sort of mythical stories. Has influence of kabuki in there too, I think. Probably the best thing about this movie is the imagery. Really striking images, really striking use of colors. This movie's in color. And there's one scene, for instance, actually this is the poster, it looks like, is referencing this scene where a guy is trying to protect himself from some kind of demon, so he covers his entire body with characters. He writes all over himself. I'm not sure what that is supposed to do, really. But Kwai is a cool movie. The only downside to this film is, like I said, with 3 parts, sometimes movies can feel kind of too long and too short. This movie is 3 hours on the dot, I think. And because it's separated into these different chapters, it still feels a little bit stilted. But also, it feels really long. So, I don't know. But cool movie, definitely worth checking out. 247 is Kes. I have not seen this movie, but I think it's directed by Ken Loach. I have not seen a single Ken Loach movie. British, that's all I know about him. Let's go on to 246, which is The Truman Show, directed, of course, by Peter Weir. This movie's from 1998. I've reviewed a bunch of Peter Weir movies on this channel, but I have not reviewed The Truman Show because I saw it ages ago. This movie is really, really great, in my opinion. Sometimes people talk about the perfect movie being something that's well-rounded, something that's got something for everybody. It's funny, it's engaging, but it's also meaningful and moving. Personally, I think the best movies don't necessarily have to be well-rounded, don't necessarily have to be accessible, but if you were trying to pick a movie that was just, the well-rounded film for everybody, could you come up with anything better than The Truman Show? I mean, this movie really has it all. Funny movie, engaging movie, poignant movie, moving movie, that speaks to some of the profound ideas of the time that we're living in now. Of course, this movie, 1998, that was not super recent. I think this movie was kind of springing out of the growth of reality television in the late 90s, but now it seems pretty applicable to the days where everybody stares at their phones. Can't recommend strongly enough The Truman Show, and it is another example of the incredible versatility of Peter Weir. Truly, does that man have any hallmarks in his career other than making really, really cool movies? Okay, before we go any further, you might ask me, do I have a Letterboxd account? The answer is no. I basically use IMDb because all I want to do is look up who was in a movie, and the websites are basically the same when it comes to that. I think that the user base of Letterboxd is a little bit different, maybe a little hipper, and there's a culture of writing these sort of pithy reviews, snappy reviews. That's kind of fun, but like I said, I just care about seeing who was in the movie, and for that, they are the same, so I stick to IMDb, even though it is owned these days by Amazon. Number 245 is Your Name. I saw this movie in theaters, believe it or not. And I don't know, great anime film. I don't have a lot to say about it. Radwimps with the score. I really like Radwimps. I had heard of them before this movie came out, I'll have you know. Yeah, cool movie. Don't have a ton to say about it. Malcolm X is number 244. I haven't seen this movie. The Best Years of Our Lives is 1946. Shout out to all our Howard Russell fans out there. Harold Russell, I think is his name. One of the few, possibly the only amateurs to have won an Academy Award for acting. He was some former serviceman who lost his hands and appears in the film playing a former serviceman who lost his hands. The Best Years of Our Lives is an incredibly cool movie. Who directed this? William Wyler, maybe? Don't quite remember. This is from 1946. I've probably seen this movie like 3 times. It is really cool. One of the things that people talk about in this movie, one of them is the ensemble staging and the deep focus. And there's a lot made, actually, about how these movies are kind of similar to some of Ozu's work, for instance, which also used a lot of ensemble staging and deep focus. This movie was sort of a darling of the Kaiju cinema because of things like that. And there was a lot of theory about, oh, well, if everything's in focus, the audience is more engaged because they have to decide what to look at. I think that's kind of nonsense in hindsight, but this is without a doubt a cool movie, and there's some extremely evocative uses of ensemble staging. There's a great moment. I forget exactly how it goes down, but Harold, who has hooks for hands, you can see these in a lot of things, and you can see other characters looking at his hands, for instance, and you can see in some shot where he's trying to like light his cigarette or something, and he's struggling to do that. Something else is happening in the scene. Characters are talking, but this is all in focus, and it's all there for you to see. This is what a great movie. Who else is in this? Frederick March, Teresa Wright, who is married to one of my film heroes, Robert Anderson, the screenwriter. The one thing I think is kind of fun about this movie, The Best Years of Our Lives, is that it has this family has a child named Fred, I think, who goes to school at one point in the movie and then like never comes back. I think he's back at the very end, but he's this disappearing child, which I always thought was kind of funny. The final thing I'd say about this movie is that it really exemplifies Hollywood before the teenager. This is from 1946, and there's 2 kids in this this movie. It's kind of centered around a family. Frederick March is the dad, and who's the mom? Some famous actress, Myrna Loy? Maybe not. They've got 2 kids, Teresa Wright and Fred. Don't remember who plays Fred. And Teresa Wright they're both teenagers in terms of how old they are, but neither one of them occupies the teenage role in society. Teresa Wright's character is like an adult, basically. She drives people around. She volunteers. I think she has a job. Whereas the other one, I already sort of mentioned, he's like a Boy Scout. He's a kid. He goes to school. He disappears, right? Barely in the movie. It's interesting that they're both teenagers, but neither one of them is really a teenager. And part of the reason is because the cinematic teenager had not been invented in 1946. And part of the reason for that is because the teenager perhaps had not been invented at all. What an interesting story, the history of the teenager, something that's wrapped up in film history. Maybe we'll bump into Rebel Without a Cause a little bit higher up the list. Okay, number 242, The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp. I'm a little bit surprised to see this on this list. This would absolutely not be on the IMDb Top 250 list, but I really like this movie. In fact, I think that this is the best movie from the Archers. Who were the Archers? Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger. They made a bunch of color films in the 40s and the 50s with a lot of cool special effects in them. I'm not going to go into a whole lot more because we're probably going to bump into more of their movies farther up the list. But like I said, I think this one is actually numero uno, The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp. Not their most famous work, but it is really cool. Some great special effects, but also just an interesting use of time. The passage of time you feel very strongly in this movie. One thing that's really interesting about this film is that it is a retrospective on the career of this Colonel Blimp, and the film is from 1943. I am fascinated by mid-World War II films that involve World War II. Maybe we'll bump into, what's that movie called? That Ernst Lubitsch, To Be or Not to Be. That's another example of a movie made during World War II when people perhaps weren't yet aware of the full implications of the war, didn't have the full picture of the war. Of course, some of these movies during World War II were just propaganda movies. Those aren't as interesting. But The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp follows this guy's whole career. The war is only part of it towards the end, but it's very interesting to see how what the perspective of World War II is in this movie, and it's quite different from, I think, what people would have said even just a few years later. But yeah, great special effects, really snappy stuff too. There's a cool mechanism in this movie where this Colonel Blimp, I think, really likes hunting, and he's got on his wall all these like specimens of different animals that he's hunted over the years. Not something I really can stand behind, but there's a cool transition where he describes hunting or something like that, and they do a jump cut to put the head on the wall. I forget exactly how it works, but there's some cool mechanic they're doing to use the heads on the walls to like establish a chronological logic of the film. Okay, now we make a pretty big jump to 241, which is Happy Together. This is a Wong Kar-wai movie, but can you guess where this one is set? Argentina. What the heck? Did you know Wong Kar-wai made a movie filmed in Argentina? Crazy. And it's got Tony Leung in it playing a really daring role as a gay man. It follows his relationship with someone else. Don't remember the other actor. This is a really cool movie. In fact, could it be my favorite Wong Kar-wai movie? I mean, that's kind of a crazy thing to say, but it might be. One theme in this movie that's there, restarting, cyclical stuff. this movie is really cool. It has some really cool locations. They go to that lighthouse that's like way down south. That's sort of a pinnacle of the film, but it's kind of a melancholy moment in some ways. This road trip through Argentina. I think it's interesting to look in films how what faraway places tend to signify. Like, these two Chinese dudes traveling through Argentina, symbolizing some kind of, I don't know, new frontier or loneliness or something. A lot of different, a film where the location is paramount. Like I said, interesting to see what faraway places signify. Okay, I'm waffling here. Let's move on. 240 is The Lion King. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have much to say about this movie. It's pretty cool. Elton John did the music. I think I saw The Lion King, the theatrical production in Chicago when I was a young child, and the soundtrack really made an impression on me. But I don't know. We've all seen The Lion King. Okay, 239, The Holdovers, new movie, Paul Giamatti. Haven't seen it. I like to give films about 10 years to sort of for the hype to die down. New movies, the trendier ones. I think this is probably a fine movie, but I'll still be around in 10 years, and I can just watch it then if I feel like it. Once the sort of hype has died down a little bit, that's generally my strategy. Number 238 is Amore from 2012, and you know what? I think I saw this movie in the theaters. One of the first R-rated movies that I saw. This is a Michael Haneke film with Chungking in it, and this movie really blew my mind. This film was the first time that I understood what auteur cinema was. I didn't have the words for it. Let me put it this way. This was the first time that I understood what a director did and what a director could do, what an artistic director who actually had something to say, how they could influence a film. And I remember it really sunk in the beginning of this movie. There's a scene where we were at a piano concert, and instead of showing us the thing on the stage, Michael Haneke shows us the audience, and you watch the audience as this concert starts. And I just thought, wow, what a novel way to do things. What an interesting choice. And that, like I said, was sort of the beginning of my understanding of like, oh, directors, interesting, they can do stuff. I would really like to rewatch this film. I saw it, 12 years ago. And I don't know what I would make of it now. I've seen a few more Michael Haneke movies. Well, quite a few more, which maybe we'll bump into further up the list. But this made a huge impression to me at the time. The way that it blends together sort of music with dignity, with time and age, is extremely moving, extremely beautiful film. Okay, 237 is Magnolia. This is an early-ish water. Don't worry, I have a lot of water. I will say there's a couple things that could go wrong in this video. Probably the most likely things to happen would be my camera to overheat or my computer to explode. I use Linux at home, and my computer works extremely unreliably. So there's some chance that there'll be some cut partway through this video as I've had to cool down the camera or something like that. But don't worry, I'm trying to film the whole thing today, even if there's a little break at some point. Okay, remind your friends to drink water, folks. So Magnolia, 237, Paul Thomas Anderson early movie. This has got Tom Cruise in it. Rains Frogs. Been a long time since I saw this movie. And I actually haven't gone on to watch many other films from Anderson. I think that's a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, right? Tom Cruise, I think it's worth highlighting. This is one of the more interesting Tom Cruise roles out there. Maybe one of the more edgy Tom Cruise roles out there. Edgy Tom Cruise is almost an oxymoron, but here he kind of does it. This is an interesting movie if you like sort of the Paul Thomas Anderson vibe of sort of slightly odd narratives or whatever. This delivers. I don't have a lot more to say about it than that. Number 236, The Face of Another Japanese film. This is from 1966. This is a pretty cool movie. It's another taste of Japanese modern cinema in the 1960s, and this movie is maybe best suited for its striking visuals at one point. There's a couple of pretty incredible scenes. There's a scene where, I forget if this is a nightmare or what exactly, I forget exactly what's going on here, but there's a scene where this guy who has, I think he undergoes like facial reconstructive surgery or something like that, and he's recovering from it, or he gets his face turned into something else. There's also there's another movie, there's an American film with a sort of similar premise, I forget what it's called. It takes place around here in Westchester County, I think. But anyway, it's a facial reconstructive movie, but there's a great scene towards the end where he's having some sort of nightmare, and everybody else is walking around wearing these bandages. And sort of this really kind of visceral, creepy vibe to it, but also maybe a little bit of substance in this sort of anxiety or skepticism towards modern medicine, and you gotta love that. This movie isn't as extreme as some of my favorite films from the 1960s in Japan, namely like Funeral Parade of Roses. Wow, what a crazy movie. Maybe that'll be on the list. I hope so, but I kind of doubt it. But it's kind of a solid, has almost a classic feel to it, but it is definitely sort of a modern, slightly radical movie. Okay. Anyway, Make Way for Tomorrow, number 235. Wow. This is great, man. You would not find this on the IMDb Top 250 list, but Make Way for Tomorrow is an absolute banger. This is one of the world's most underrated films ever from 1937. Who directed this? Leo McCarey, or was it Preston Sturgis? I don't really remember which one, but it's got a great cast of some character actors. Beulah Bondi is in it. Kind of a tearjerker film, but really holds up. A movie about two grandparents, aging parents being sort of left behind by the world, their kids trying to figure out what to do with them. Incredibly beautiful movie. This is, I think, to me, I think this is the best movie from the 1930s, basically. And the one thing that's sort of interesting about it is that I think at the time it was really like a tearjerker and it was just like, wow, this is like the saddest movie ever made. And now I think it reads a little bit more just as a compelling like social drama. But yeah, Make Way for Tomorrow is wow, what a great movie. What a great movie. It's a joy to see on this list. I would strongly recommend it. Millennium Actress is number 234. This is one of my favorite anime films. This is Satoshi Kon, who's most famous probably for his movie Paprika, but he also directed Perfect Blue, which is my favorite anime film, probably. Yeah, Millennium Actress is another cool movie that has some of the same themes of Perfect Blue, a film that is really sort of, it's about an aging actress. These people go to visit this actress, and she's sort of reflecting on her career, but it is this sort of psychedelic trip through her past. And it's a really sort of imagistic movie in a way, where she's understanding her identity, grappling with these things in through images. That might seem kind of vague, but if you watch it, I think you'll know what I mean. Millennium Actress, that's a cool movie. Good music too. The First Slam Dunk, 2022. I have no idea what this is. I think it's another anime film. There are a lot of Japanese movies on this list. Japan, of course, is heavyweight, really punches above its weight in cinematic history, but we'll see if this trend continues or not. Oppenheimer is number 232. I haven't seen this. I have not watched a Christopher Nolan movie since The Dark Knight Rises, I think. Anatomy of a Murder is number 231. This is a what's the name of this director? The guy who was in Stalag 17. Anyway, this is a film that's often credited with really helping thaw out the production code stuff, move past the production code. This is a classic. I've seen it. I don't really remember it that well. I don't remember being like deeply struck by it, but hey, it's a classic movie, so might be okay. Aparajito. This is a Satyajit Ray movie. I haven't seen it. I've only seen one of his movies. I'd like to watch more. The Green Mile is number 229. This is from 1999. Frank Darabont Jr., same guy who directed The Shawshank Redemption, but this movie is far worse than The Shawshank Redemption. In fact, I think The Green Mile kind of sucks. This movie has a supernatural element to it. It's based on another Stephen King story, so perhaps the supernatural thing is not that surprising. But yeah, to me, I just couldn't take this movie seriously with the sort of plot line that it has. It does have all the trappings of like a big movie, and I think if you watch The Shawshank Redemption first, and then you're like, oh, he made another movie, this is going to be great, you can really get yourself hyped up for this, and I think that leads to a lot of people thinking that this movie is a lot better than I think it is, because like I said, I don't think this is worth really anyone's time. Pretty long movie, and I just really couldn't take it seriously. But hey, it's on the IMDb Top 250 list as well, so people like it. 228 is 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days, the approximate runtime of this video, most likely. I have not seen this movie. Number 227 is Rashomon, Akira Kurosawa, another Japanese movie. This is a film that I think suffers a little bit from being a classic in the sense that Rashomon has effectively been remade so many times. All of its tropes have been used so many times that when you watch the original one, it's sort of like, oh, that was it? You've kind of already seen it. And I was a little bit disappointed by this movie. Significant? Yeah, sure, but I wouldn't really recommend this one exactly. I also don't really love samurai films. To be honest, we'll see how many more we run into here. I might expand on why that is. Marion Max is 226. I haven't seen this movie. 225, The Bridge on the River Kwai, a big David Lean film. Fun fact about The Bridge on the River Kwai is that the person who won the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay for this film did not speak English. Ooh, that's an interesting one. How could that be? Well, I should maybe make a short about this sometime. How could this be? Well, this is a classic case of blacklisting. So, yeah, the people who had worked on the screenplay, or the other people who had worked on the screenplay, couldn't be listed for political reasons, essentially. So the honor fell to some French guy who did not speak English. This is a real classic. Delivers as a classic movie, huge sets. To me, my favorite David Lean movies are not the big, like, expedition ones. They're the more personal films. But this delivers on his thing. The Elephant Man is 224. I haven't seen this movie. Ritual is number 223. I haven't even heard of this movie. Marcel, the Shell with the Shoes On is 222. I don't know this movie. After Sun is 221. I haven't seen this. Again, this falls within my sort of 10-year let the hype die down period. Napoleon. Oh, is this the? Oh no, Napoleon from 1927. Okay, I thought this might be the new one. For a second, I was a little bit surprised. I have not seen this movie. Silent film, I guess. Okay, 219. Secrets and Lies. What a great movie. This is a Mike Leigh film. I'm a huge fan of Mike Leigh, one of the best directors out there, in my opinion. The films that I like are sort of the gripping, serious social dramas, psychological realism, sad, grueling films. And, man, Secrets and Lies definitely falls in that category, although it is also a deeply funny film and, man, sort of a profoundly uplifting film. But mainly it's an absolute sledgehammer that will completely destroy you if you watch it. This has got Timothy Spall, Leslie Manville in it, sort of all the classics. Is Leslie Manville in this? I think so. All the classic Mike Leigh people are here. This, in my opinion, is Mike Leigh's best film. Some people might, well, I don't know, Topsy Turvy is extremely good too, but that's in the historical thing. So he made, even though a lot of his films are in some ways profoundly similar, there are different strains to his work. He has the sort of historical films like Topsy Turvy or Mr. Turner or the one about the riots that's not that great. Then he had sort of the class dramas like Secrets and Lies or a few of the other ones that are set in present day Britain. Vera Drake, that's another historical one. Anyway, I think this is the best movie. Couple of really cool long shots in it, but the thing that's best about the film is just the emotional intensity and the sort of unexpected insights. Timothy Spall is a photographer in this film, and there's a lot of just really brilliant sessions with him as a photographer. Just Mike Leigh can capture a moment in a way that few can rival. For instance, there's just a brief scene of Timothy Spall taking his character. I can almost remember his character's name, but not quite. Morris, that's his character's name, taking a picture of a couple that is not on great terms with each other. They look sort of uncomfortable together. One of them wants to wear her crucifix. The other one doesn't want that. They sort of nitpicking, and for the photograph, they sort of pretend to like each other. And the moment they take the picture, they've kind of reverted. One of the many just beautiful moments in this film, Secrets and Lies. Can't recommend it enough. 218, The Prestige. Yeah, I don't think this movie is very good. Kids movie, ultimately, I guess, Christopher Nolan kind of thing. But from its early years, I mean, yeah, movie's okay, kind of clever, but not really that interested in it. Saving Private Ryan, 1998, Steven Spielberg film. Obviously, I have not seen this movie, actually. I've kind of got war movied out over the years, and I don't know. I don't have a strong will to see this one. 216, A Matter of Life and Death. This film is also known as Stairway to Heaven, and this is another film directed by the Archers, and this one probably is the one that has their most impressive special effects. So this film is called Stairway to Heaven, and it features in it a real Stairway to Heaven, a really cool piece of special effects where they build this huge staircase that's sort of an escalator thing that goes up and up and up into the clouds. This film is about like an RAF pilot who gets shot down, and he lands on the beach, and then he falls in love with a woman, but he's supposed to have been killed or something, and he gets tracked down by someone. There's a great scene where they're in like the receivership department in the I guess the sort of like St. Peter's place. There's this big like center they build, this big center where I guess their angels are sort of keeping the file on everybody who's supposed to have died, and they realize they've missed one guy, and it's this RAF soldier or this RAF pilot, and an angel goes down to Earth to try to find him, but he's fallen in love, and this brings out this big puzzle because well, is it fair to have this guy who you didn't collect, now he's fallen in love? Is it fair to really take him to the afterlife? Well, they have a trial to determine this. It reminds me a little bit of something like The Devil versus Daniel Webster. I forget if this movie came before that one or the other way around. Well, I think the idea of that came first. Anyway, there's one really interesting Easter egg in this film is that it features a camera obscura. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, this is probably the Archer's film with the most notable special effects, and for some people it rises to the top. Really a cool movie. I'd recommend it. Dersu Uzala is 215. I have not seen this movie. King of Comedy is 214. Yep, haven't seen this. The Shining is 213. This is a cool movie. I'm a little split on what to do with some of the really famous movies we're going to bump into here because, I talked about this one, for instance, on my IMDb Top 250 video, and I probably am about to just spit out the same things. We'll see. But The Shining is a cool movie, and Kubrick is a great director. Kubrick is an interesting director. I think one thing that's kind of fun about films like The Shining is the culture that has grown up around all the details and things like that. And I think it's up for debate a little bit in terms of what sort of viewership is really the most productive or makes the most sense. But I kind of like there's a little bit of a pact around Kubrick that's like, yeah, he meant to do everything. Go look at all these cool little details. And he did spend a crazy amount of time on his film. He was super detail-oriented. It's a little hard to know. Sometimes some of the stuff goes a little bit too far. There is a documentary about this film, Room 217, I think it's called, which details a lot of conspiracy theories surrounding this, the idea that it might have hints about the moon landing being fake embedded into this film, things like that. And it's kind of fun, but I also think that The Shining, and most of its work, stands on its own as a film. You don't really need this sort of cult aspect about it. You don't need the conspiracies. You don't need any of the fun stuff to appreciate the movies. The Shining is not my favorite Kubrick film, but I think it's a great movie. A horror film, it's interesting. Often it can be a mistake to try and make a movie that's too many different things, right? A horror film that is too overtly about other stuff as well. Of course, on the other hand, horror movies almost always allude to some sort of anxiety. The Shining, I think, has a pretty good balance of being a horror movie, but also having a little bit more. And I think that's something that is pretty interesting about Kubrick throughout his career, is that he was, he's renowned as an incredible director, but he didn't make like uncompromising art films. He made pretty accessible movies, and The Shining is one of them, but also films that have not really in-your-face stuff, but just a lot of depth, a lot of interesting undercurrents, a lot of things just a little bit beneath the surface. And sometimes these look like conspiracy theories, and sometimes it's just the feelings, right? The anxieties of the movie that really resonate with something bigger than the film itself. So I think that's The Shining. I would like to rewatch it at some point, maybe. Vertigo, 212. Again, quite a famous movie. I've read the book that this is based on. What's it called? Living and the Dead by Boileau and Narsajek. I probably have a copy of the book somewhere around here, but I'm not going to go dig it up. Vertigo, of course, is an all-time classic. Great movie. Alfred Hitchcock, a legend. I don't love the ending of Vertigo. I don't think it makes much sense. In fact, I read the book to try and figure out what the heck was actually intended, and in the book, it's better. There's a number of interesting changes. For instance, the book is set during World War II, I think, whereas the film is not. There's a few things that are are different, but the movie works well enough. Of course, it deserves its status as a classic, and just sort of the texture, the texture of the feeling and the look is so not really distinct, sort of, but it's just so Hitchcockian. It's really a fun movie to watch. Okay, Eureka is 211. I've never heard of that movie. One thing to keep in mind is if there's any films here where you think, what, he doesn't know this one? Leave a comment, and I will potentially do a review of it, watch it, do a video about it. In the future, that's one reason why I'm doing this, to try to discover some more things. I'm a little bit surprised that there are a few movies on here that I've never even heard of, but hey, there's a lot of movies out there. Okay, Winter Light is 210, and this movie I have not seen. This is an Ingmar Bergman movie. I get it confused with Ordette, the Dreyer movie, which I have seen, but yeah, this one I have not. 209 is The Sweet Smell of Success. This is directed by Alexander McKendrick, I think, and this is a small little subgenre in the 1950s that I like to call sort of the jazzy post-noir or something like that. These like slick movies about modern life that are kind of really energetic, but also there's some seediness to it. And The Sweet Smell of Success is really about seediness, and it features a jazz band. Oh man, cool stuff. I really like this movie. This reminds us, what's that movie about Leopold and Loeb called? Not Repulsion, but it's something, some one-word title like that. Anyway, that's another movie that I'd put in this little category, the 50s sort of post-noir jazz, seedy jazz film. I really like that vibe. And The Sweet Smell of Success, I'm surprised it is not more famous, because I think it has such a vivid kind of identity about being about these slick businessmen. I've never seen the television Mad Men, but I kind of feel like this is the real version of that. Okay, Umberto D is 208. This is like your classic neo-noir film, although it's from 1952. I've seen this movie, and to be honest, it didn't make much of an impression on me. Partly because I'd seen so many neo-noir films at that point, I just am like, oh, it's another one. A sad guy who's homeless or whatever, and it's a dog or something that he can't take care of. So I don't have a lot to say about this movie. It's probably pretty cool, but to be honest, the neo-noir stuff, I felt like after I saw a couple of them, the returns diminished somewhat. The Tale of Princess Kaguya is number 207. I haven't seen this one. Life and Nothing More is 206. I haven't seen this. Solaris is 205. And of course, I've seen this movie because it is Andrei Tarkovsky film, all-time great. I have not gone back to revisit these movies in a long time, but I'll attempt to say a few things about it. This is a science fiction film. I guess it's a Tarkovsky movie set on a spaceship, which is kind of cool. I like movies that push the boundaries of what science fiction can be, because in a lot of ways, science fiction is a somewhat straightforward genre. A lot of science fiction films are set in the future, but they're really about today. They're really about right now. They're backwards looking sort of parables almost that exaggerate the current social quagmires, the ills of society today, the things that people are anxious about. Well, fast forward 10 years or 100 years, and now these things have come to define society. Oh, society's been destroyed because of this thing that people feel like we're not dealing with now. Interesting. But Solaris is part of a group of films that is really doing something completely different with science fiction, and I think that's pretty cool. Don't have much more to say about it than that. I think I'm going to, at some point, do a Tarkovsky series on this channel again, because, being one of the most famous directors of all time, I worked my way through Tarkovsky fairly early on in my film life, before I was maybe ready to completely engage with everything that he's done. 204 is The Grand Budapest Hotel. I haven't seen this movie. I've seen some Wes Anderson films, but this one, I guess, this one's almost getting to that 10-year cooling down period for the trendiness. Hard to believe that this came out 10 years ago. Wow. 203 is Mulholland Drive. I've seen this movie. Pretty cool. It's a little hard to know what to do with this movie. I think some people are tempted to try to make a board with all the yarn and the pictures and connect all the characters together and be like, oh, this person turned into this person. It's about this. It's about that. But I think when I was younger, I think that was one of my intuitions, one of my instincts when watching movies or more complicated movies, is to like figure them out, was to like understand what happened, like what's going on here. Now I tend not to do that, partly because I noticed that as the years go by, you kind of forget a lot of those details, and you're left with something else when you think about the movies. In this case, probably a bigger story about just kind of Hollywood life. The stars, the seediness, the older people, the young people, people chasing after their dreams, all this stuff, and the kind of cauldron where it is all stirred together. Been a long time since I saw that movie, so I don't have a whole lot more to say about it than that, but pretty cool movie. This is a sort of a class of film that is kind of an art film, but is using horror tropes to keep people from falling asleep, and I'm a little bit split on movies doing that. I think sometimes it can mislead people because they can think that they're watching an actual horror movie, but then it doesn't have any of the elements that it should, like a plot that makes sense, or fun, I think, is another important part of horror. So there are movies. Yeah, it's maybe some people can be disappointed if they get into this, and then it's like a little bit incoherent and weird. But 202, Sorcerer. So Sorcerer is a pretty cool movie. This is a William Friedkin movie. He's the guy who directed The Exorcist, along with a few other things. This is a remake of a film called The Wages of Fear, which may or may not be coming up higher on the list. Kind of hope it is. Personally, I think The Wages of Fear is better than Sorcerer, but Sorcerer is a cool movie. William Friedkin is really an underrated director. I mean, he's not underrated. People know about him, but I think his legend could be even larger. This movie's from 1977, and there's a few sort of topical things. There's a few ways in which they amp up some of the tension in the original. So these movies, both of them, are about an oil well that has caught on fire, and to put it out, they're going to blow up the well, which seems a little counterproductive maybe, but this is what people really did. If you're curious about this kind of thing, you might look up Red Adair, who was an Australian oil well firefighter guy who did this kind of stuff. And there's some interesting documentaries he made. One about putting out something called the Devil's Cigarette Lighter, I think. And you can go watch this documentary about how they did this back in the day. Really cool stuff. Red Adair. But anyway, here there's an oil well explosion, and they need a bunch of nitroglycerin to blow up the well to have all the rubble basically land on it, put out the fire. And they need some people to drive the nitroglycerin from one side of a country to another one to get it near this oil well. And the rest of the film is basically a driving suspense movie. I happened to watch The Wages of Fear, the original one, the night before I took my driver's ed test when I was like 16 or 17. This was a complete coincidence. I didn't know what the movie was about, but man, it made me feel great for the drive test, because I thought, well, what's the worst that could possibly happen? At least my car isn't full of nitroglycerin. That movie is one of the most stressful films ever made. And Sorcerer in some ways amps things up, but I don't know. I also just feel like, well, and also the beginning of The Wages of Fear is kind of boring. And Sorcerer, yeah, there's a number of ways in which it's better, but there's also a part of me that kind of resents their remake, because the original is just it's so great already. I don't know. Maybe we'll see it further up the list. But it's a cool movie, without a doubt. And it adds something. Friedkin has something about his movies, a kind of subversive thing going on. Some interesting undercurrents that he introduces into this movie. Samurai Rebellion is number 201. I haven't seen this movie. And just like that, we go from page 3 to page 2. So we've gone through 50 movies, and we've only been going for 38 minutes. So that's not bad at all. But I assume the hit rate is maybe going to increase as we continue going. Okay, number 200 is Raging Bull. I think this movie is pretty overrated. I have a few videos about Martin Scorsese movies, and in general, you'll probably pick up on the fact that I am not a huge fan of Martin Scorsese for a few different reasons. But yeah, Raging Bull really just didn't do it for me. Not really a compelling character, not really a character I'm interested in. Almost all of Scorsese's movies are about characters I'm not really interested in. They're almost always portraits of men who are kind of on the edge. And in some ways, well, the films are kind of about their downturns, their fall from grace, their fall from glory. Oh, this guy flies too close to the sun, and he's punished for it. But I don't know, to me, it's just not a very compelling story. And I think that these movies tend to be pretty ambivalent about whether or not they're condemning or glamorizing the lifestyles that they're about. In some ways, you could say, oh, well, but look, it's about the guy, it's about the life falling apart. Clearly, they're condemning it. They're saying this is all bad. But I don't know. I think a lot of people watch the movies because they think some of this stuff is cool. But look, Raging Bull, I actually think is not quite as much about that as some of the other movies, which we'll probably run into further up the list. But still, this movie just really didn't do it for me. This feels like it's got all the classic movie juice, but it's just not actually, I don't know, didn't do it for me. Also, this movie is not really that old, 1980, not exactly the classic boxing movie. There are plenty that came before it. Scorsese, in some ways, I think almost makes movies for the sake of the movie itself, which, I mean, I don't know, maybe that's not a bad thing, or maybe that doesn't make any sense, but this movie feels like it's kind of made to, for the sake of being a classic movie or something like that, and just didn't exactly do it for me. Also thought the ending was just totally anticlimactic. I don't really like the ending of very many Scorsese films at all. I think Taxi Driver has a good ending. I think After Hours has a good ending. I think every other movie I've seen that he has made has a bad ending, anticlimactic, and this one is definitely in that category. Let me give you a suggestion. Go watch The Great White Hope instead of Raging Bull. In some ways, a much worse movie in terms of production quality, but in some ways, a much better movie in terms of like, wow, you actually care about what's going on, and it's actually compelling, in my opinion. Okay, The Iron Giant is $199. I haven't seen this movie. Rififi is $198. I have seen Rififi, although it blends together for me with a bunch of other heist movies. The heist movie is a really interesting genre. I think I probably talked about this in my top 250 video. The heist movie, believe it or not, in some ways is actually the result of the production code in the United States. In Hollywood, in the 40s and 50s, the production code said basically, oh, the good guy can never win. I mean, it said a bunch of stuff. It said you got to sleep in separate beds, right? Hence all the twin beds that you see in movies, all about the production code introduced by this guy Hayes, who used to be the postmaster. He was a Catholic. Back in the day, the Catholics basically ran Hollywood, and they said, okay, got to sleep in separate beds. Can't have characters end their own lives to get out of like problems with the plot. Okay, can't have the good guys be victorious and things like that. This gave rise, obviously shaped the films that could be made, and it gave rise to a particular type of anti-hero, right? Because the good guys couldn't win. So this, in some ways, kind of influenced what the heist movie genre would look like, because heist movies are kind of about the bad guys usually, but of course the production code did not allow them to get away with the heist movie, and this kind of gives you the blueprint of the traditional heist movie, not the snappy like Ocean's 11 heist movie where the good guys do, or where the bad guys do get away with it, but the traditional heist movie is one where the heist works. They do this, there's an ingenious robbery, but then people turn on each other and they get caught one by one. They betray each other. They make mistakes, and everything sort of falls apart and is kind of sad in the end, even though it's actually law that is prevailing. And it's interesting that this sort of anti-hero thing should arise from the production code, because it's kind of the opposite of what the production code is actually intending for, right? You're sort of rooting for these bad guys. That was sort of the opposite of what they wanted, but it happened anyway. Anyway, Rififi is a French movie. Well, okay, so what happened there? Well, heist movies took a big detour through France, and one of the things that's interesting about this is that a lot of French directors, Melville is one guy who really kicked off sort of the heist film movies like Bob the Gambler. We'll almost certainly talk about some Jean-Pierre Melville films further up the list. But anyway, I think there was some interest from French directors in heist movies in Hollywood because they were kind of un-Hollywood, like in some ways, right? Because they didn't have this thing where it's like, oh, well, the good guys are guaranteed to win. It's kind of this classic happy ending. There was sort of this subversive and kind of bitter feeling to these films, even though, ironically enough, they were like that because they were following the rules. Still, I think that resonated some with these French directors. So, hence, we get some of these French heist movies. Whew. And then, eventually, the genre gets carried on into even, films like Heat from 1995, follows that original blueprint. Although, we also do have some newer heist movies that don't. So, let me give you one brief thing just to sum up. If you are watching a heist movie and you want to know if it's legit, well, do the good guys, or do the bad guys, die at the end? If so, cool. It's a legit traditional heist movie format. Otherwise, you're probably watching Ocean's 11. Although, of course, Ocean's 11 is a remake from a somewhat older movie as well. Anyway, Rififi, it's a classic. It delivers on the old heist movie thing, but like I said, I can't really separate in my brain from a couple of other heist movies from a similar time. Cure is 197 from 1997, ironically, and I haven't seen this. 196 is Some Like It Hot, and here we get to Billy Wilder, one of my all-time favorite directors. In fact, I think I've seen more Billy Wilder films than I have films from any other director. In fact, I recently did a video on The 7-Year Itch, which is not a very good movie, and certainly not one of his best. But Some Like It Hot is an absolute classic, a comedy being kicked off by the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. What a great way to start a comedy film. This movie has all the usual suspects in it. Jack Lemmon is there, Marilyn Monroe. And I'm a little curious to know, to see what modern audiences would think of some of the like cross-dressing themes in this movie. I'm not sure. Maybe those haven't aged as well. It's been years since I've seen this movie, but a couple of the jokes still absolutely deliver. And hey, maybe it's not politically correct at all today, but nobody's perfect. 195, The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Michel Gondry film, another Jim Carrey entry on this list. A classic movie, a compelling manic pixie dream girl in it. Kirsten Dunst is in this film. Is that the one? Classic film, kind of fits in the time travel category, I would say, even though it's not really about time travel. I think this is a good film for people who enter film looking for clever movies, which is how I got into film. Because, let's face it. I was watching all these heist movies as a kid. I was interested in stuff like, these clever, tricky movies. Well, Eternal Sunshine is a great movie for people like that, but it also adds this other, like, romantic element to it, something you probably don't find as much in heist movies. And I think that's pretty cool. So I don't have a lot to say about this movie. You've probably seen it anyway. Okay, here's an interesting movie, The Cremator from 1969. Who directed this movie? Haas? Jerzy Haas, maybe? This is what a ripper of a movie. This is a great movie. This movie is from, this is a Polish movie, I think. And it is basically this is like possibly one of the darkest comedies ever made. Is it? I mean, it's a stretch to even call it a comedy, but it is, I think. It's set during World War II. It's kind of about collaborationism, but it takes things to the extremes. The thing that's cool about this movie is that it's partly this like kind of classic parable film, but it also is a radical modernist film in its style. It's from 1969, and things go really off the rails. And the movie looks extremely cool. It's edited in an extremely jarring and sort of subversive way. This is a ripper of a movie. Really cool. Really cool. Cremator. Le Samurai is 193. Well, we were just talking about him, Jean-Pierre Melville, and this is one of his most famous movies with Alain Delon in it from 1967. Alain Delon is a car thief, I think. I remember in this movie, I think he has a big ring full of all the car keys, and he goes and he just tries out a bunch of the different keys, and eventually he finds one. Not quite as secure back in the day. I don't remember a whole lot else about this movie. I think, he's some kind of crook or some assassin or something. Like that, again, movies that are inspired by Hollywood anti-heroes, but taking them to another level, and we have this French cool factor in it. Great performance from Alain Delon, as usual. Okay, 192. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? I haven't seen this movie, believe it or not. I would really like to watch it, but never gotten around to it. Okay. 191, Ace in the Hole, another Billy Wilder film. This one with Kirk Douglas, I think. This movie is kind of your classic media frenzy film. It's about some people that get stuck in a cave or something like that, and the media circus that surrounds it. And in some ways, it's kind of a simple premise, and you kind of get what you pay for. It's sort of a little different from your typical Billy Wilder movie. Feels a little bit more like a classic, just kind of like a Hollywood classic, a humdinger movie with a pretty simple premise. But it delivers. It's got a cool ending shot. 190, Children of Paradise, 1945, Enfants du Paradis. This film is a contender for greatest film ever made, directed by Marcel Carné. Marcel Carné was kind of the director of a movement of film, pre-war French cinema, called poetic realism. What? Poetic realism? That doesn't make any sense. Well, watch the movies, they make sense. Hotel du Nord is du Nord. I don't know how to pronounce French words. Anyway, that's an example. his work. But this film, Enfant du Paradis, actually came out in 1945. It was made basically during the war. At some point, they had to like hide all the film during the invasion of France, and it was really on the rocks. So not sure if it would turn out, but they ended up making the movie. Thank goodness. Really interesting production history. You can probably go to Wikipedia and get a much more in-depth version of the story than the one that I just mumbled through. But man, like I said, this is a truly great movie. First of all, the cast is amazing. Jean-Louis Barrault, I think is his name, plays Baptiste, the mime, in it. So this is a film about set in a theater of some kind, and I think the name Children of Paradise refers to the seats really high up in the theater where people sit, or something like that. I forget exactly. But yeah, it's a love story between this mime and a singer or an actress or something like that. Garance is her name in the film, played by Arletty. I don't know. I have no idea how to pronounce that name. Arletty or whatever. That does not seem like it's French to me, but it is. Famous French actress, in fact. So this mime and this actress, and man, this movie is unreal. This movie is so cool, so good. The pinnacle of this poetic realism thing, even though that it was supposed to be a pre-war genre. Well, this movie was made partly before the war. Yeah, can't recommend this movie enough. And it's cool that this movie captures films like this, even though it's down here dwindling at 190. But hey, it's on the list. Number 189 is Ugetsu. And I don't remember if I've seen this movie or if I've seen Sancho the Bailiff. I've seen one of them. Interesting film. Again, you know, when you're watching a lot of these Japanese films, there's this like really big traditionalism thing going on, especially when they're films that are sort of set in the past. This is another kind of samurai movie. I'm describing either this movie or Sancho the Bailiff. I think it's Ugetsu. I think it's the one I've seen. This film is moving, though. In a way, this almost has like a neo-realist tilt to it, like almost combining, I forget this director's name, he did both of these movies, but it's almost like a samurai neo-realism, is how I would maybe describe it. Okay, 188, Underground, Amir Kusturica. So I have a whole video on this movie that I posted relatively recently, so I could talk about this one at great length, but I won't go into it too much. If you're really curious, watch my video. Underground was a huge movie for me when I was younger. I went through a big phase of watching films from the Balkans, and Underground is what started it. This movie is from 1995, and it won the Golden Palm. It was the second time that Kusturica had won the Golden Palm. And this is sort of everybody's entry point to Balkan cinema. I went from there to watching all kinds of movies from the Balkans, not just ones by Kusturica, but all kinds of stuff. I started listening to all kinds of Balkan music. Kusturica's band, Goran Bregovic, of course, who wrote the incredible music for this movie. Just go listen to the music if you don't want to watch the movie. It's really good stuff. But I would also listen to Indexi and Prolivo Kazalista and all these random bands. So I really went all in on this. And it was only recently that I rewatched Underground and was curious if it was actually going to be good. This movie has a lot of bravado in it, and Kusturica has a lot of bravado. Kusturica is a complicated guy. These days he's like endorsing Putin. He started his own town or something. He doesn't really make movies anymore. He kind of jumped the shark towards the end of his career anyway. With that film On the Milky Road, I think was maybe his last movie. Really wasn't that great. He cast himself in it alongside some famous actress, I forget who. But Kusturica is kind of a polarizing figure. But I honestly feel that as a filmmaker, he has some humility, and I think the movies kind of come first in some ways. And I think Underground, like I said, I rewatched it pretty recently, and yeah, my taste in film has shifted a lot from these kind of like really sort of out there poetic films. I mean, one thing that's so cool about the Balkan cinema is that there's a lot of metaphorical stuff in it. And like Underground, some of the central concepts in this movie, which is a dark movie, a movie about war, a movie about a lot of scars and a lot of trauma, a movie that's really processing the wars in the Balkans, which were still taking place as the film was made. So a really dark movie, and yet it still has metaphors in it. It's still a spiritual and symbolic film. I think that's really beautiful. And yeah, these movies are probably just deeply, deeply entwined with the events in the Balkans. And that's a powerful thing. Underground's probably the best movie to come out of that region. And it is a great movie. My taste has changed somewhat. But this movie absolutely holds up. If you want to know more, check out my full video about this where I ramble on for much longer. 187, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Haven't seen this. It was spoiled for me a while ago, and then I never got around to watching it. 186, Opening Night, a John Cassavetes film starring Gina Rowland, who's married to John Cassavetes, I think. This is my favorite Cassavetes film. Probably either this or The Killing of a Chinese Bookie. Great movies, both of them. This is a film about an actress preparing for opening night, right? I think I've got this movie, right? Yeah. An actress preparing for opening night, and it's your typical sort of really grueling, just unyielding intimacy. Unyielding psychological drama from John Cassavetes. Cassavetes, early in his career, it took him a little bit of time to get the formula right. But once he did, he made a couple of just incredible movies. This one, A Woman Under the Influence, and Killing of a Chinese Bookie, I think are kind of his three masterpieces. I think this is probably the best. And like I said, just grueling psychological realism. There's a couple of really interesting things in this movie. One thing that this movie does well is that it has this sort of doubleness of the show that's being put on and the life of this actress. You're wondering if this actress is basically losing her mind as she's going to put on the show. And it means that you end up watching a lot of her performances really closely because she's like in rehearsal and you're really anxious that she's going to blow it, that she's going to like start saying all this weird stuff, that she's going to rebel, that she's not going to do things right, that things are going to go poorly. So you're like watching through a microscope, like, oh no, is it gonna work out? Like, oh no, what's gonna happen? And then it will seem like it starts to go off the rails. But this is where the doubleness comes in because you don't know, wait, what's in the play and what's the sort of real thing in the movie, right? So, she seems like she's going off the rails, but was that a line in the film or not? Really great dramatic device in the film. They're not the only movie to do that, but this movie does it really well. Another thing that I like about this film a lot is its use of the slap. So one of the famous scenes in this movie is that in the play, she's supposed to be slapped. And man, the slap has a pedigree in Hollywood. You know, the number of classic films in which a woman is slapped is kind of insane, right? There's even a film called He Who Was Slapped, I think, but that's a bit different. But yeah, I mean, the slap is like kind of I think actually, when I was in college once, I think one of my professors showed us some sort of like compilation film called like The Slap or whatever that was just edited together a ton of like slaps from classic Hollywood. And it's like, it's crazy. The legacy of the slap is kind of crazy and grim. And this film has a scene in it, tough scene to watch, where in the play, Gina Rowland's character is supposed to be slapped. And the actress doesn't really want to do it. And man, great scene. So opening night, yeah. Great movie. Probably my favorite Cassavetes film. Okay, Metropolis is 185. Again, this is a famous movie. Metropolis is one of the most accessible silent films out there. This is a Fritz Lang movie. Because it has a ton of special effects and because it's engaging. It really has a fast pace. Absolutely worth checking out, especially if you haven't watched a lot of silent films. This is a good starting place. The one thing that's interesting about this movie is that it's about a cyborg. So it features this, I forget the term they use exactly, but it features this like android, a woman sort of made of metal or whatever. And this is a very early use of this cyborg thing, which has become a trope that has cut through like all of Hollywood. Like the number of movies about like robots that look like humans but aren't is crazy. And there's something somewhat profound in this idea of like doubleness, this idea of people that, something that is human but is not human, the idea of finding the boundaries of us. And this is something that as AI gets more and more sophisticated, as robots get more sophisticated, this is something that starts to resonate more and more, even though this movie is almost 100 years old, and people were already talking about this idea of the blurring the lines of what it means to be a human. Interesting. That's pretty cool. 184, Judgment at Nuremberg. I love this movie. Stanley Kramer movie. I think this is the best Stanley Kramer film out there. this is part of sort of a movement in the 1960s of serious social dramas that are black and white. So in the 1960s, in the early 1960s, is an interesting time, right? The 1960s, of course, is a pivotal decade for cinema all over the world. In France, in the early 60s, we have the New Wave, and it's basically the birth of modern cinema. But that doesn't get to the United States for quite a while, right? We're doing radical stuff in Japan, like we talked about earlier. That's also kind of an offshoot of all this. So yes, modern cinema is being birthed around the world in the 1960s. And, by 1967 and 68 and 69, that would happen in the U.S. We'd have movies like Midnight Cowboy or whatever that would start to be modern, American films. But what about the early 60s and the mid-60s in the U.S.? Well, some other stuff was going on. First of all, we were getting movies that were sort of the pinnacle of classic Hollywood, right? Genres almost always come to their peak as they also are about to end, right? You wonder if superhero films are reaching this point. We can only hope that, things tend to be at their most vibrant and vulgar when they're also on their way out. And often, there's a lot of satire of this stuff that kind of exists at the same time. Like, stuff almost turns into self-satire towards the end of things, right? Well, in the 1960s, we had some of that, and maybe we'll run into a movie like this. I think of films like What a Way to Go, sort of mid-60s like spectacle and a half, as a pretty good example of a movie that falls into that category. But there were also some like serious social dramas being made, and I think these for a while are what I would have said was like my favorite genre, my favorite like period of film was these serious social dramas of the early 1960s. And there's a bunch of examples. Maybe my favorite one would be Long Day's Journey into Night. And yeah, these are movies that are doing some of the classical stuff, right? They're in some ways classic Hollywood films. They're kind of moralistic. They're social dramas, but they have a little bit more. They're a little bit less mechanical than a classical film, and they have a little bit more. They're a little bit more radical, right? And Judgment at Nuremberg is probably, it's either Judgment at Nuremberg or Long Day's Journey into Night. I think Sidney Lumet directed that. Katharine Hepburn's in it. That would be my favorite from this period of time. But Judgment at Nuremberg, yeah, incredible movie. This film, I think, has the greatest cast of all time. Okay, maybe not, but this is what comes to mind. If you ask me, what movie has the greatest cast? Man, Judgment at Nuremberg. Wow. I'm not even going to be able to tell you all the people who are in it. Burt Lancaster is in it. Spencer Tracy is in it. William Shatner is in it. Judy Garland is in it. Maximilian Schell is in it. Montgomery Clift is in it. And they all give incredible performances. This is a film that looks at the war crimes from World War II. Of course, it's set in Germany. It contemplates them. Marlene Dietrich is in this, although her role is maybe not entirely necessary. Is she in this? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Anyway. The way this movie kind of balances between a simple moral intellectual question, the real incredible stakes of World War II, just the immense tragedy of the situation, the idea of reconciliation, the idea of moving forward, the way it balances all these things. The idea of justice is really, really powerful. The performances, the individual performance in this movie from Montgomery Clift, who plays a man who was deemed to be unintelligent and was not allowed to deemed to be unintelligent and was sterilized in Germany during the war. And Judy Garland's character in it too, her performance, both of them are like really, really incredible, really moving. I think this is one of the greatest courtroom dramas of all time. Of course, a lot of courtroom movies are really hamstrung by the fact that they don't follow any of the actual like realistic court proceedings, but this movie dodges that a little bit because it's this war crimes tribunal, and nobody knows how that works anyway. So it gets a little bit of a pass. There's one pretty interesting mechanic in this film early on. The way that they handle language is pretty cool, because these trials would have been done in multiple languages with simultaneous translation. In fact, these war crimes trials in Nuremberg were one of the first uses of simultaneous translation. I think this is one of the places where it was invented. And in the film, of course, they don't want to mess around with everybody speaking different languages the whole time. Of course, many of these actors don't speak the languages that their characters speak, although Maximilian Schell does, but nobody else, basically. So what do they do? Well, they start out with people speaking the different languages, and then at one point they kind of zoom in. There's one slightly overused visual trope in this movie is the quick zoom. But yeah, at one point everybody's talking in their native languages, and they show people putting on the headphones. They kind of show you the mechanism of simultaneous translation, and then they do an interesting transition, and then Maximilian Schell is speaking in English, and you're like, oh, okay, we're in translation world. And then from there on out, the whole movie's in English, which is a pretty interesting dynamic. Of course, films taking place in the languages that the events actually took place in is usually the right way to go. It's usually a mark of legitimacy. I just don't know if... I don't know. This movie, it works the way they do it, and it allows actresses like Montgomery Clift to come in and just make incredibly moving statements. Huge variety of the cast here. Spencer Tracy representing, he plays one of the judges, and he's representing this more traditional side of Hollywood, and there's this justice angle to it as well. And of course, Judy Garland, being in the film, carries with her the sort of tragedies of her career. So really effective casting. Of course, Burt Lancaster is one of the defendants, and Burt Lancaster usually plays a good guy. He's usually this principled, upstanding guy, but here he's one of the crooked judges. So this is about the Nuremberg trials, but it's in particular about the trials of judges who collaborated during the war, and so really this focus on justice. Anyway, really moving film, really poignant film, but also at its core, this great question that is a moral dilemma that has stumped people throughout the ages, which is, what is the line between doing what you're told and when should you make your own judgments, especially if you are a judge. Anyway, that's Judgment at Nuremberg, absolute classic. Central Station is 183. I don't know what this movie is. Yeah, number 184 is the old Jean Daleman. 23, Kwai du Commerce. 1080, Brussels, 1975. I sort of butchered the title there. I haven't actually seen this movie. Somebody spoiled this movie for me. And yeah, it seems like a lot to sit through when you already know how it ends. So yeah, it is what it is. Pulp Fiction is the next on the list, 181. I was expecting this to be a little bit higher up the list. It's quite a bit higher up the list on the top 250 on IMDb. But I don't really like this movie that much. I'm not much of a fan of Quentin Tarantino. Yeah, you got to give him some credit for reintroducing or for making independent films. That's pretty cool. But Quentin Tarantino just seems like such a weird and unsettling guy, and it shows in his movies. I don't really like these grindhouse movies that sort of are glamorizing violence. This is another film that is really kind of obsessed with the filmic nature of it itself. It's a film for the sake of film, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but this movie, just, what's the point, man? I don't know. 180 is I don't know how to say the title of this, but Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0, Thrice Upon a Time. So another anime thing. I thought this was a television show. But I guess not. Anyway, I haven't seen that. The Third Man, 1949. So this is Carol Reed film set in Vienna, I think. A really classic score, great movie. Orson Welles is in this, and the casting of Orson Welles is really clever in this movie because this film is all about finding a guy. It's all about looking for someone. You don't know what he looks like throughout the entire movie, but eventually you bump into him, and it turns out it's played by Orson Welles. And the deployment of the star like this is really clever because the moment that you see him, you're like, I know that guy, right? Works well. The ending of this movie is really cool. Carol Reed, underrated director. Surely this is his best film. 178, The Night of the Hunter. So this movie is directed by, what's his name? That British guy who plays the judge in the Witness for the Prosecution. Richard Lawton or something like that. Anyway, The Night of the Hunter is a really cool movie. This is a great movie for people who have not seen a lot of older movies to introduce them to because it has a really slick style. It's put together really nicely, and it hums along quickly. this has got, what's his name? I am forgetting the actor's name. In it, and that actress. Oh man, already my brain's starting to turn to soup here. But yeah, the thing that really puts this movie in the foreground is the snappy style. The priest with the love and the hate tattooed on his hands. The woman in the car underwater with her hair like floating up. There's a little cameo from Peter Graves in the beginning of this film, i.e. the Mission Impossible guy, i.e. Ever been to a German prison guy. Cool movie. This isn't one that, as I like I said, I think this is a good first old film for a lot of people to check out because it's cool. But as I watch more and more movies, it's not one that like comes up in my mind quite as much. Double Indemnity is another good example from 1944. This is another Billy Wilder movie. I mean, this is a great movie. This is probably the best noir film ever made. Maybe some other things like The Maltese Falcon are more like iconic or did more to really spring the genre. But to me, this is the best noir film that is out there. The genre just really comes together perfectly and is tied up in a nice bow, and he quotes the movie or something like that. This film has a great cast. Fred MacMurray, so people might not realize entirely, but Fred MacMurray was playing a little bit against type here as Walter Neff. Then there's the guy, I can never remember this guy's name, but Keyes is the insurance investigator in the film. This movie is just a clockwork. It's just a beautiful clockwork. This is I've read the book of Double Indemnity. It's written by James M. Cain, I believe. That's how much I like the movie. I read the book. There's a few interesting changes between the book and the movie. For instance, in the movie, Barbara Stanwyck's character is named Phyllis Dietrichson, but in the book, her name is Phyllis Nerdlinger. For 10 points, can you tell me what other film reused this name Nerdlinger, possibly in a reference to this book? It's a Coen Brothers film, their noir film called, what's it called even? The Man Who Wasn't There, I think, something like that. The film with the flying saucer. Not a very good movie, in my opinion. But there, the department store in the film is called Nerdlingers. Maybe it's a reference. Also, Nino Zucchetti's name is slightly different in the film than in the book. In the book, he's called Beniamino Zucchetti. So, hey, the more you know. Some good trivia. But look, this is a famous movie. You probably already know all about it. If not, go watch it. Because like I said, there has not been a better noir film. What a clockwork. It just goes. It's, man, a real humdinger of a movie. So many interesting twists. Yeah, what a great movie. Network, 176. Oh man, been a long time since I saw this movie. I was a bit underwhelmed by it at the time, partly because, I feel like these days, well, let me say first of all, this is a interesting piece of trivia about this movie, is that this was the first posthumous Academy Award for acting, I think, came from this movie. It went to Peter Finch. No, wait. Maybe. Might not be true. Double check anything I say in these long videos because they're not researched, but I think that's true. Anyway, but of course Faye Dunaway is the one here. And it's an incredible performance from Faye Dunaway. I'm a huge fan. Network, I remember thinking it was a little underwhelming. I think the reason is just because a lot of the stuff that's like this crazy extreme satire at the time is now like true. Like the state of broadcast television has declined so much since 1976 or whatever, or something like that. This movie did not feel biting to me at the time, but I was pretty young when I watched it, and I should probably revisit. Certainly, it is a classic. Okay, 175 is another Tarkovsky film, Nostalghia. Interestingly, on Letterboxd here, they write Nostalgia out spelled correctly. When I think there's some interesting thing about the title in Russian, at least, is it's sort of misspelled or something like that, or it's spelled. Yeah, I forget exactly the details here. This is another Tarkovsky film, and this one back in the day was one of my favorite movies. I think possibly because it was the one I could most easily wrap my head around or something like this. There's an interesting sort of metaphor. Yes, this is the Candle movie, by the way. This is the swimming pool in the Candle film, one of the most legendary shots in all of cinema history. This movie has a central metaphor, I think, or at least there's one sort of central idea that's kind of easy to wrap your head around, which is that it's about a poet who's grappling with not being in his homeland, and there's sort of interesting metaphor between the homeland and faith. And these two are, in fact, pinned together in the final shot of the film where he is, well, maybe I shouldn't spoil it, but this guy is sitting in a field, and, like in a homeland, and the camera zooms out, and you realize he's inside of like the ruins of a church. Interesting. And of course, this probably maps onto Tarkovsky's uncertainty with leaving the Soviet Union, the place where he had done most of his work, but also a place that was no longer amenable to him in many ways. So this is a beautiful movie, and I should rewatch it sometime to see if I can get more out of it than just one or two central metaphors. Dead Poet Society, 174. This is also a Peter Weir film, isn't it? Right? Let's see. Yes. Yeah, I think this movie is a little bit overrated. Obviously, it's a cool movie. You've probably seen this, so I don't need to go into it too much. Not my favorite Peter Weir film by any means. But hey, it's a classic. 173 is Perfect Days. So this is the new Wim Wenders film, right? Well, I haven't seen it yet. I do want to watch this one. This is the one Wim Wenders made a film like set in Korea or something. Interesting. Okay, Lanat is 172, and I haven't seen this. I'm clicking on this one, which is sort of cheating. There's a couple. Right, this is an Antonioni film. I haven't seen this, but it's Jean Moreau Mastroianni. I've seen a couple of his movies. I've seen a lot of Antonioni movies, but he made a trilogy here, and I've seen one of them, but not this one. Okay, Throne of Blood. I haven't seen this movie. Another samurai movie. Alien, number 170. Well, an absolutely classic movie. Who doesn't like Alien? What a great film. I don't know if I have a lot to say about this. You probably know what Alien's all about. A movie that I think today, it's easy to forget just how, like, groundbreaking Alien was. This movie's from 1979, right? Yeah. I don't know if I can really set the stage appropriately, but this movie was pretty ahead of its time, I think. And really set forth a bit of a sea change in what science fiction could be, that paved the way, I think, for a lot of movies that came out in the 1980s, which in some ways is a bad thing. But no, Alien, what a legendary movie. I mean, it's so cool. 169, Heat. Okay, well, fairly recently put out a video about Heat, so I'd recommend checking out my full review of it there. Heat was the movie that started it all for me in terms of watching movies. It was one of the first R-rated films I saw. Like I said, I like clever movies. I liked heist movies, and Heat is kind of the ultimate heist movie. Huge cast: Robert De Niro, Al Pacino. You may have heard of him. Val Kilmer is in it too. A young Natalie Portman is there. Not very good in it. John Voight is there. Hank Azaria. Who else? I forget. But this film's directed by Michael Mann, and it is the classic heist movie formula. Yeah, this film, I'd been watching heist movies, but I'd been watching like PG-13 rated heist movies, and one of the first R-rated movies that I watched, and it was the first R-rated heist film that I watched. And, Heat is an extremely visceral film, so, it kind of gave me the wrong idea about what R-rated movies were all about in some ways, because I was like, whoa, wow, they're all going to be so intense and like so visceral and so like crazy. But in fact, Heat is one of the most visceral movies of all time. And many of the movies that I watched later didn't even come close to its level of just engagement. When I first watched this movie, I could not stop thinking about it for days. And it's what started me like watching movies all the time and being obsessed with film. That said, when I think about it now, my taste in film has changed a ton, right? And Heat is not exactly the serious social drama, the psychological realism that I'm really focused on these days. So I rewatched it a couple months ago to see if I would still like this thing. And the first half of the movie, I kind of thought, wow, this is not that great. The roles for women in this movie are terrible. I was not feeling it that much. But the second half of this movie is still so powerful and so visceral that it's kind of impossible to come away from this film feeling anything other than stunned. And you know what? As moved as I was the first time that I saw this film, it impacted me even more this time. I could barely get through it, to be honest. This is a sledgehammer of a movie. I talk about a bunch more stuff in my review of it. Simultaneity is a big theme of the film. Its views on modern society, its relationship to films like Crash, the racial politics in it, all this kind of stuff I talk about in my full review. Fantastic Mr. Fox is 168. I have seen this movie, but man, I don't remember much about it. Wes Anderson animated film. Yeah, a lot of these Wes Anderson movies deliver so much on the promise of Wes Anderson that they're always satisfying in that regard, and they always have that going for them. But I don't know. This movie didn't really stick out to me in any other way. So, 167, Casablanca. Of course, a classic, an all-time classic. I don't know if there's really much I can add to about this movie. I'll give you an interesting piece of trivia about it. In the final scene with the airplane, they found really short actors, dwarfs, maybe is the correct term these days, to stand next to the aircraft to make it look bigger. Wow. I have heard a little bit of back and forth about exactly what type of movie this was. Some people say that this was a B movie, Michael Curtiz. Maybe wasn't the biggest director, but this had a big cast. Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman and Peter Lorre and all these guys. Peter Lorre's in this, right? This had a big cast, so I don't think it's quite fair to call it a B movie. And even though it was somewhat early for these people, they already were pretty well known. But yeah, great movie, real classic. The definition of a classic movie. I would still probably recommend Double Indemnity over Casablanca, to be totally honest, to somebody who has not seen these movies. But of course, this has got to be one of your first stops on a tour of 1940s film. Number 166. And this is where he starts to realize, man, this is going to take a long time. We're an hour and 21 minutes into this, and we've, oh gosh. Well, anyway. Fight Club is 166. Fight Club is a little bit divisive, but this is the type of movie that just is once in a generation, really. What a cool movie. Of course, Fight Club is part of this sort of late 90s, early 2000s resurgence of independent film in the mainstream, which thank goodness we finally had recovered from the 1980s, and we had some cool movies in the 90s, and we even got some cool movies that were famous and had big actors in them. And this is one of these, a really independent film. And yeah, like I said, divisive. Some people say, oh, look at this rampant masculinity. Some people say, but look at its, how it calls out like mainstream capitalist culture. And you know what? This movie does a lot of different things, and it's kind of all over the place, but I have to say, I really like it. I think Fight Club is a great movie. And yeah, of course, it's supposed to provoke to some degree, and of course it will. I don't think the conclusion that you should come away with from this movie is, masculinity is good, let's all go start a fight club, although some people did that. But I also don't think it's quite as simple as it being a satire of that kind of thing, or of saying, look at how dumb these guys are, they want to fight each other. I don't think it's quite as simple as either ends of the spectrum. It probably has a lot more to do with how consumerist culture is tied up with masculinity, is tied up with rage, how people are kind of spun around, how people are all turned around in these days, disillusioned in some ways, a film about disillusionment. And yeah, but look, besides just the nature of that, a movie that is extremely slick, a movie that is put together really, really well. Tons of clever things all over the place, super engaging. Yeah, look, great movie. 165, Charlie Chaplin, Modern Times. So this is a Chaplin film that's kind of a bridge period between a silent film and a talkie. Some people think that Chaplin only made silent films, but that's not true at all. Charlie Chaplin, really, really interesting guy. Somewhere over here I have the huge biography of Charlie Chaplin. Really interesting guy. He grew up with his mother mostly committed in a mental institution. Charlie Chaplin, of course, was born in England. Grew up there in poverty, started performing, eventually came to the United States, made films. His career exploded, global icon. Then later on, bit of an outcast, was expelled from the United States due to political stuff. Really interesting guy. Some great movies. And he made some sound films that maybe we'll see on this list that are really incredible, like Limelight. But yeah, this Modern Times is kind of a bridge film, and which is interesting because it's from, let's see what year, 1936, is really late to be making a silent film in 1936. So it was sort of inevitable that he's going to make sound films, but still a lot of this is a silent, this in many ways is a silent film. It just happens to have a few parts where there is sound, but The Tramp still, I don't think, says anything in this movie. This is a great Chaplin film. One of his best known ones, of course. It delivers on all the Chaplin comedy stuff, but it also has this kind of anxiety of the modern world thing going on, the assembly line kind of thing. Very different type of modernity than we would be talking about in later movies. But yeah, the hijinks that take place at the intersection of the assembly line and the person, which in some ways not too different from some of the stuff that you might bump into in like Metropolis. But yeah, modern times anyway. Famous movie, you probably know about it. Akira, 1988. This is an anime film. I've seen this movie. This is a really, really influential anime film as I understand it. I watched it, thought it was pretty good. I don't have a lot to say about it, but it seems like this was a movie that really brought anime to the world stage in like a feature-length film. And this is a really cool, really fun movie to watch. 163, The Lives of Others. Let's see if I can remember this guy's name. Florian Henkel van Donnersmarck or something like that. Yeah, this is a great movie. I watched somewhat recently, it's a couple years ago at this point, his newer movie called Never Look Away, which is about Gerhard Richter, or it's loosely based on the artist Gerhard Richter, and that's a pretty cool movie. The Lives of Others is a film about the Cold War, about surveillance in the Cold War, and I would say that this is a film that's just really well put together. I really don't like describing movies as like well made or well done. Usually when people say that, they are not. They just don't know what the heck they're talking about. They have nothing to say if you're saying that a movie is well done. But The Lives of Others to me is a movie that, at least when I saw it, which was a number of years ago, I didn't walk away with any like huge thematic poignancy, but I walked away with just a really beautiful, engaging, emotional film that's also really intense and suspenseful. Surveillance makes for a really suspenseful dynamic. There's a lot of films that sort of center around surveillance, because if you think about it, surveillance is kind of inherently ironic. I'm talking about dramatic irony. We're not talking about like humor here. We're not talking about winning the lottery and dying the next day. We're talking about the classic dramatic irony where one party thinks something is the other way and they're not aware of something that the audience is aware of. Well, surveillance, that's like the definition of that. So this film is suspenseful, but it's also extremely intimate. And yeah, I mean, look, surveillance is an intimate thing as well. You know, I remember when I was in college, I was part of this system administration club, and I really shouldn't be doing all these like tangents in such a long video, but whatever. I was part of the system administration club, and we had these security cameras posted around our rooms to keep an eye on all the stuff, the game controllers and the Xboxes and things, which were stolen at one point. But anyway, I think you don't get it until you are actually reviewing CCTV footage. The kind of like weird power trip and like voyeuristic thing that's going on there. It's hard to describe, but it's interesting. And this movie captures that in some way. So it's a very intimate film in some ways, but there's this interesting relationship between the people who are being surveilled and the person doing the surveillance, where in some ways you know each other very deeply and very intimately. Of course, that's only one way. But in other ways, you don't know each other at all, and you don't really have each other's interests in mind. The Weeping Meadow is 162. Oh, man. Have I seen this movie? Maybe. I'm going to need to click on this one. This is No. What? Oh, right. This is an Angelopoulos movie. No, I haven't seen this. Theodoros Angelopoulos. Hopefully we'll bump into some more of his stuff farther up the list. Okay, La Dolce Vita, 161. The embarrassing truth is that I did not finish this movie. I need to come back to it one of these days. A Fellini film, one of the most famous ones. But yeah, I haven't really seen this. A Special Day, 160. Don't know this movie. The Best of Youth, 2003 is 159, and this movie is just too darn long. I've never gotten around to watching it. I have a friend who watched it. He said it was good, but yeah, too long for me. Django Unchained. Yeah, well, if you want to watch the ever-sensitive, ever-insightful Quentin Tarantino make a film about slavery, have at it. But to me, that sounds extremely unappealing, so I never watched the movie. Terminator 2, Judgment Day. I have seen this movie. I'll be back. Is that the right one? I don't know. But I don't have a lot to say about it. You probably know about the Terminator. Yeah, it's interesting. Again, this movie's back from 1987 is still resonating in some ways. And it's funny because it's not like it was like brilliant writing to have some anxiety about technology, these Skynet industries, these people surveilling everything. it's not like that was like some amazing insight, and yet it is still resonating all these years later. The Treasure of the Sierra Madre is 156. This is a film, the title of which is often misstated. It is called The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. Remember that. Do I have anything else to say about this movie? Not really. This is a John Huston movie starring Walter Huston, or is it a Walter Huston movie starring John Huston? Something along those lines. And, sort of a classic adventure film. I saw this movie a while ago, and it's kind of fun, but it's also one of these movies that almost feels... One thing about this movie that's a little interesting is that I think a lot of the locations that it was filmed at in California were then used a whole bunch more for, like, television shows later. So this film almost feels like a television show to me, a little bit. Not like a modern one, but it almost feels like a 60s sitcom. In fact, there's an episode of Get Smart where there's a spoof of The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. And in some ways, it's almost a testament to the film, how vivid it is, that it can be so easily kind of assimilated into all these other things, and that it can... It can only do that because it's so iconic in the first place. But like I said, when I actually watched the movie, I was just a little bit underwhelmed by it in some ways. Sort of felt like I'd already seen it. Okay, 155, The Celebration. This is a Vinterberg movie, part of the Dogma 95 thing. So this was a movement in Scandinavian film, a film movement with a manifesto. They set out a list of things. How do you make a cool movie? Well, it should be very naturalistic. That's kind of the idea of the Dogma 95 thing. Is naturalism. So no artificial lighting, right? I forget all the different parameters, but you're supposed to take, like, you weren't supposed to use sets. You're supposed to go on locations. They're supposed to be locations that already existed, and then, try not to modify stuff. So in some ways, these movies have a very handmade kind of feel to them. And honestly, I don't really think that this manifesto is really that great. This group produced a couple of really good movies, including The Celebration. But if you look back at it now, it's like, well, I don't know. Is there anything inherently, like, righteous about making films that way? No, of course not. But it did produce some really, really cool stuff. And The Celebration is maybe the most famous film from that. The movie is called Festin, I think, in the original language. And it's funny because it's called The Celebration, but this is one of the most grim, one of the most dour films you'll ever see. This is about a wedding or some sort of celebration that goes, like, horribly wrong. Everybody ends up getting a fight. And, in some ways, this tickles my psychological realism thing, but it also is almost turmoil as a genre, or like turmoil for the sake of it movie in some ways. So I'd be curious to rewatch this now, but The Celebration, pretty cool movie. Did I get the director right? Is this... Yes, it is Vinterberg. Okay. 154, Rocco and His Brothers. So this is a Luchino Visconti movie from 1960, starring Alain Delon and Claudia Cardinale. This is a really good movie. This is kind of has some elements of neorealism in it, but it's from 1960, which is a bit late for neorealism. It has some other things going on there too. This is about a guy, Rocco, and his brothers, Rocco e suoi fratelli, and he's a boxer, as I recall, and it's an interesting movie because it combines this kind of really suave Alain Delon like boxer character with a lot of sort of social turmoil and poverty, family issues. I think one of his brothers dies or something like this. This is a kind of a grim movie, but I really like this one. Actually, I should rewatch this because I saw it a long time ago, but it made a big impression on me at the time. Okay, 153. Das Boot. This is a classic movie. This is a German film about World War II. There's not a ton of German movies about World War II. Downfall, of course, is a notable one. There are a lot of German movies about World War II, but it's an interesting subject because, of course, most of the world thinks of Germany as the bad guys. So when Germany themselves make a movie about World War II, there's an interesting sort of dramatic thing going on. There's an interesting conflict, moral conflict that is generated if the Germans are going to be the good guys in the movie. And Das Boot has some of that because it's about the crew of a German U-boat. This film is probably notable for being really, really suspenseful. I would say there's a lot of cool mechanics. In it, for instance, they have the depth gauge that they show you throughout the movie, and it's like they say at the beginning, well, we can't go lower than whatever. So, if the gauge reads blah, 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 then we're in trouble. And then, of course, as the movie goes on, you see them go like lower and lower, and you see all, it just builds the suspense. And that's just a really great dynamic. Of course, the sound design is a big part of all these submarine movies because you hear the torpedoes and all the stuff, and the depth charges and the pings are a really big part of it. I mainly think of this as a super suspenseful movie. I'd have to watch it again to pick up if there's other stuff going on here too, but Das Boot is a great one. Super, super cool movie, really engaging. There's a dubbed version of this, I think. Of course, as a cinephile, I have to tell you, don't watch that one. Find it with subtitles. Anyway, The Hunt, Jagton, is 152, and this is also a Thomas Vinterberg movie, I think, right? From 2012. This movie made a huge impression on me when I saw it at the time. Like, huge impression on me. It has Mads Mikkelsen in it. I need to rewatch this movie because when I was a kid, it blew my mind. I mean, this was one of the most visceral, one of the most grueling films I'd ever seen. And at the time, I think it can be easy to get a bit confused, like, between a good movie and like a really intense movie, right? And I mean, I think this is a good movie. But at the time, I was really just like in awe of how powerful it was. There are also some things about this movie that, in hindsight, though, don't really make sense. Like, why do they just believe the kids at all costs or whatever? But yeah, I want to rewatch this one because this was a favorite of mine for a long time. I just thought this was like the most powerful movie ever made. It's about a teacher who's accused of having inappropriate contact with his students, yeah, great movie. 152, The Father. Haven't seen it. 150, The Fifth Seal. Oh man, I have seen this movie. This is going to take some digging for me to remember what this one is. This is like this is a movie, let's see. Yeah, this is this movie about a thought experiment, right? Right? I might have to click on this one. I just want to make sure I get the country right. Zoltán Fabry, right. And this is a Hungarian movie. Right. Yeah, I have seen this movie. Yeah, it's interesting, too, because The Fifth Seal, the description on Letterboxd here, ends with, the watchmaker asks a hypothetical question that will change their lives. How could a hypothetical question change your life, right? That really piqued my interest back in the day. A long time ago, I used to find new movies to watch by going to IMDb and searching through movies and just searching by rating alone, but not having a limit for the number of votes that are cast. Because the IMDb Top 250 obviously weights the rating for how many votes have been made. And same thing is true on the Letterboxd Top 250. I think, although obviously the people voting in these two different places are totally different because these lists so far look really different. But anyway, I would go and just search for the top-rated movies without a threshold of how many votes they had. And this yields you a totally different listing, and you get some really interesting gems, and that's how I discovered, among other things like The Marathon Family, Vishwarupam, and other stuff. That's how I came to the movie The Fifth Seal. Yeah, I was like, man, a hypothetical question that could shape their lives. What could this question be? And I sort of remember what it is. It's a question about, like, if you are in charge of a man's life or whatever. If you have an innocent man's, I can't quite remember what it is, but it has something to do with, like, if you're in a position of power and there's somebody who is innocent, would you punish them? Or no, if there's somebody who's guilty, would you punish them? Or something about this. It's about innocence and punishment, basically. And they sit around this table and they debate it all night long. And I won't spoil the ending, but let's just say things get real. Decent movie. I'm surprised that's on the list here. Yeah, I didn't know other people had seen this movie, but okay. 149, Prisoners, Denis Villeneuve. Of course, Denis Villeneuve has now gone on to big things like directing Dune, but Prisoners was one of his first like American movies that really hit it off. Of course, he before that had made like Incendie. Personally, I think his older stuff, the more obscure stuff, is the cool stuff. I haven't seen the Dune movies, so I really have no comment there. But Prisoners, I don't know. To me, this movie was too intense. It wasn't fun to watch. It was like, man, they're just like squeezing every drop of intensity and suspense out of this film, and it was just tiring. At one point, I just sort of found myself out of the movie a little bit, just thinking like, oh, come on, they're not going to add another, like, they're not going to turn the ratchet again. It's a really interesting question when you're making like a thriller. You know, how much do you just make it intense? How much do you make it like grueling? And maybe there should be balance with like a little element of fun or a little bit of self-awareness or something like that. And I felt like this movie didn't quite get the balance right. To me, it was just too brutal and like too intense. And it just became like, yeah, I just got tired, you know? Okay, 148, 2001, A Space Odyssey. Well, an all-time classic. The first time that I watched 2001, I didn't like it that much. I thought, really? This is it? Oh, another classic movie that's just, people just think it's a classic for no reason. Okay. Spoiler alert, most classic movies are good, and if you don't like them, it's probably a you problem. But 2001, when I first watched it, look, it was a me problem. I didn't really pick up on the movie that much. But I rewatched it a few years later. I actually saw it in New York. In 2018, I remember going to the Village East and seeing the 50th anniversary of the film in 70 millimeter. And that was different. Now, I'm not saying, like, oh my God, 70 millimeter changed my life. I actually don't even think that seeing movies in the theater itself is usually that important. I don't think it matters that much. I know some people say, like, oh, this movie, you got to see it in a theater. And 2001 is a pretty good candidate for that. I don't think it matters that much, but I will say that there is a difference. At least I think for me, the difference was that when I was watching it at home, just like on a small screen, I wasn't forced to engage with it in the same way that I was when I saw it on a big screen. This is a movie that you kind of have to stare at. I mean, it reminds me of In A Clockwork Orange, where they force the dude to watch the movie. That's kind of how you got to approach 2001 in some ways, or at least it made a big difference for me when I really sat down in the big theater with a big screen and you see the stuff like really in your face. The volume is turned way up. Very, very different in how I saw it. This is another sci-fi film that is not your typical sci-fi film. Now, I think it is a little bit up for debate if the thing that it is really doing is that noble, or if it's just sort of slightly vague 1960s spiritualism. The movie is possibly a bit dated, but yeah, legendary movie. It's cool, man. The texture and the special effects and just the texture alone is worth watching. Of course, the film has a fairly easy to grasp sort of thematic arc, capturing the ascent of man in these different stages. I've also read the book 2001: A Space Odyssey. I read that ages ago. You might not realize it, but the book and the film were actually written simultaneously, and the book was published slightly after the movie came out, I believe. Anyway, that's a classic. You've probably seen it. 147, Raise the Red Lantern. I always get this movie mixed up with Farewell, My Concubine. So let me double check. This is Zhang Yimou, and okay, yes. Raise the Red Lantern is the one that, okay. Okay, I got it. This is a cool movie. I mean, when you talk about like classic mainland China movies, this is those two movies, spoiler alert, those are the ones, right? And these movies are both from the 90s, I guess. Is that true? Yeah. And they captured, I think, the art house market in the United States in a way that not a lot of mainland Chinese movies had. And so, yeah, these are the ones that come to mind. And look, they're both good movies. These are not my favorite Chinese movie. Neither one of them is my favorite Chinese movie, but they're pretty good. I think that Farewell, My Concubine is cooler than Raise the Red Lantern, which I was a little bit disappointed by the scope of the film. In some ways, it takes place mainly like in one estate or whatever, and I just didn't find it to be like super dynamic. But it looks cool, and yeah, I mean it's a good movie, but it is not my favorite Chinese movie. Okay, now we move on to 146, and ironically, it's Chinatown, which is not a Chinese movie, obviously. And this Chinatown is a classic film, neo-noir stuff. You know, a noir film, but it's from the 1970s. It's in color, of course, and you know it's got the classic California plotline of the water underlying it all. This film is in some ways noir through the cinephile lens. It's like if someone obsessed with noir films goes and makes a new one and kind of has like this self-awareness that maybe some of the older ones don't have, you get some of these things. And so I think it's interesting to see how it had so many elements that are connected to the legacy of California. Even, for instance, the Chinatown aspect of it, the Chinese population of California was enormous as the state was expanding, building all kinds of things, right? And these Chinatowns are, I mean, I think people maybe don't realize the enormous history of like California Chinatowns. And this movie captures that a little bit. I mean, it's not some documentary or whatever, but it's pointing towards that a little bit. Of course, the water stuff is pointing to that a little bit. So, like I said, this movie is just bringing these things into focus a little bit more than the classic noir film, than a real noir film would have. Now, of course, at this point, this movie is like 50 years old, so it is also a classic. In fact, 1974, yeah, it is 50 years old. So, yeah, it's hard to think of it in some ways as like, oh, slick, new, refined noir 2.0. But the fact is, I don't think there's been any noir 3.0 that is as compelling as this movie. In some ways, I would tell you, nah, just go watch the original stuff, right? But no, Chinatown is a really cool movie and a classic Jack Nicholson performance. 145, Chungking Express, another Wong Kar-wai movie. This is a really cool movie. It's a snappy movie. One of the things that's remarkable about it is just that they got the movie made, right? Yes, there's one thing to admire about directors. It's like the artistry, everything that goes into this. And of course, Wong Kar-wai makes some incredible movies that are beautiful, touching, very substantive, very deep, and also just cool, you know what I mean? But also, he actually got the movie made, right? That's the other thing that's really impressive. This movie is made like on some tiny budget, really short time frame. Great cast, Tony Leung, Faye Ma are in it. Really great score. There's the end credits of this movie have the Dreams, a cover of Dreams by the Cranberries, sung by Faye Ma, who was mainly a musician. That is so cool. In fact, that's the only version of the song I listen to these days. And when I hear the original, I think, what the heck is this? The English? What are they doing? That version I think is in Cantonese. Really cool. There's that reggae song that's in it. Dennis Brown, maybe someone like that. And there's the California Dreamin' in the film. What do I think of when I think of this movie? I think of the collapse of the personal space, right? So this is a postmodern movie, without a doubt. And yeah, this collapse of individual privacy things. This movie reminds me some of Vive l'Amour, the Taiwanese film from sort of a similar time frame. And, you know, that's a film where like three people are living in the same apartment without like knowing each other. And it's like this crushing portrait of like urban like loneliness that's driven home by these people living in the same room, and they don't even know each other, right? This movie isn't quite as extreme and it's not as dark, but there's another, at least one of the many elements of the film is this like similar kind of like shared apartment situation. Faye is like sneaking into the apartment or something like this. I forget exactly how it goes down, but this similar like shared space really highlighting how people don't have their individual places so much, the evisceration of sort of home, and yeah, this kind of listlessness, right? And like overstimulation. And yeah, look, that's postmodernism for you. And yeah, really cool movie, but also a deep movie. Look, Wong Kar-wai, one of the greatest directors of all time, and Chungking Express is arguably his, well, second greatest film. You would say In the Mood for Love, Chungking Express is probably what most people would say. Yeah, incredible movie. 144, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Well, this film obviously does not meet my 10-year wait for the hype to die down criteria, so I have not seen that. Shoplifters from 2018. Of course, I have seen this. A slight violation of the rule, but no. I love Hirokazu Koreeda, and this is another great movie from Hirokazu Koreeda. It has all of his classic themes in it, so yeah, if you don't know Hirokazu Koreeda is a Japanese director, I think he's one of the greatest directors that is alive today. I think Nuri Bilge Ceylan and Hirokazu Koreeda are the greatest living directors, probably. At least the people who are still like actively making stuff. And yeah, this is a director who does a lot of like psychological realism, social drama. So it's right up my alleys. Both those guys are. Not sure to recommend these movies to everybody. Koreeda's movies tend to be really like sad, and really intimate. And this movie is no different. But there's some other stuff that this movie has that's common with his career. One of them is the idea of a makeshift family, right? So a lot of Koreeda's films probe the idea of what a family is. For instance, in Like Father, Like Son. Well, actually, let me skip this because I hope we're going to bump into that movie further up the list because it's truly amazing. But yeah, there's a lot of films that are about makeshift families, and Shoplifters is no different. This film, in a lot of ways, is like Parasite, which is also sort of about a makeshift family and has this like criminal and like class elements going on in it. I would take Shoplifters over Parasite 10 times out of 10. I think it is Parasite's a cool movie, but it ain't subtle, right? Parasite's a slick movie. I'm glad that it had its moment. Look, we'll probably talk about Parasite, but yeah, Shoplifters, I would take this any day of the week over that movie. So much more subtlety. But that's maybe just my personal taste in film. But hey, I really like that movie. Okay, now 142, we're at Farewell, My Concubine, right? So Raise the Red Lantern, Farewell, My Concubine. Like I said, those were the two like really big mainland movies from the 90s, and I think they captured some of the American audience as well. These are like, yeah, some of the iconic Chinese movies. Not my favorite, but I think Farewell, My Concubine is better. Farewell, My Concubine has a much greater scope. It's a historical film about some like sort of performing artist of some kind or whatever, that goes through like the Cultural Revolution and all this stuff. And the historical scope of this movie, I think, is truly beautiful. Reminds me, there's another film called To Live, and I think To Live and Farewell, My Concubine are two really great movies. It's interesting because Farewell, My Concubine and Raise the Red Lantern are really different, really different. But I think this one's better. Chen Kaige directed this, right? And yeah, it's about this kid who was raised in a theater troupe in the 1920s and goes through the Cultural Revolution. And wow, great movie. We'll probably talk a bit more about Chinese cinema. I think one of my favorite things about it is just the emotional subtlety in a lot of these movies. There's films that hinge on just the slightest change in expression, right? Subtle stuff, but good stuff. And these, yeah, the Cultural Revolution obviously was such a profound upheaval in society. There's a couple of movies that process that, like To Live and Farewell, My Concubine. I think there's a lot of ammunition there, and both those movies capture that time. Sadly, not a lot of mainland China movies that reach the same level, but there are some, and maybe we'll bump into them further up the list. Children of Men is 141, and this is a Alfonso Cuarón movie, I think, from 2006, so it's some of his earlier work before he got a little bit trendier. More recently, he did that space movie. What was that called? Gravity? Yeah, Children of Men is another movie that I thought was too intense. It just didn't get the balance quite right of like, where's the fun? Where's the, like, what's the point of all this? It's just this like really grueling sci-fi thing. And yeah, some people talk about the really long shots that are in this movie, which is cool, but I don't know. That thing is kind of a gimmick to me, and this movie didn't do it for me. 8.5, another great Fellini movie. One of the best films about car washes. I don't remember a lot about this movie, to be totally honest, but it's a classic. I probably need to run back through the Fellini stuff one of these days and get a picture of it for the channel. But 8.5 is a basically as classic as you can get for an art house film. Tampopo is 139. I haven't seen this. Monster 2023. This is one of the newest movies that I have seen, and this is another Hirokazu Koreeda. Movie. Yes. And yeah, I saw this in theaters last year, and I have a video about this. So I could talk about this one at fairly great length, but I'm not going to. I'll just say that it has a score by Ryuichi Sakamoto, who passed away last year. Sakamoto also had a film called Sakamoto Opus, which came out last year, which is basically a filmed concert from him playing when he was on the verge of passing away. Ryuichi Sakamoto, one of the greatest composers of all time. I don't think we'll bump into Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, the Nagisa Oshima film, on this list, but I was just talking about that and thinking about that in my review of In the Realm of the Senses, another Nagisa Oshima film. Anyway, Ryuichi Sakamoto, one of the greatest film composers of all time, incredible musician. He didn't write a lot of original music for this film because his health was significantly declining, so a lot of the scores assembled from work that he had already done. But man, it is so striking. And this movie, Monster, is another brilliant Hirokazu Koreeda film. It is not written by Hirokazu Koreeda. He wrote pretty much all of his other movies. And this one, he took the screenplay from somebody else. And there are a couple signs of that. It's not quite as subtle as some of his other movies. There's a couple of things that aren't quite on the level, but it is still an incredibly beautiful movie. And honestly, I think that this movie, Monster, has one of the greatest scenes of all time in it. I'm not going to spoil what it is, but I'll just say it has to do with that foghorn sound you hear throughout the movie. The scene where that culminates with is truly one of the greatest scenes I've ever witnessed. And this movie, Monster, is special. And Hirokazu Koreeda, yeah, like I said, one of the greatest living directors. Z is 137. Costa Gavras, probably the greatest political director of all time, the master of the political thriller. In fact, it's not even close. Like, if you think about political thrillers, tell me anyone who has made as many, or even one political thriller as good as, like, even an average Costa Gavras film. Name one. There aren't any. This dude, like, did the genre by himself, right? Incredible director. You got to check this guy out. Z is probably his most famous film. Yves Montand is in this, although he's in another one of his films too. Start with Z, but do not stop there. Costa Gavras has a ton of really cool movies. Special Section. I'm not going to be able to remember all the names off the top of my head, but switching to my second cup of water here. I'm not going to be able to remember all of his work off the top of my head, but yeah, the guy basically created a genre on his own, this sort of political thriller, which are really slick. I mean, Z is a really well put together movie, really snappy, really moves along, but also like moving political films with fidelity, right? With fidelity. Adult Tintin, sort of. I don't know. Great movie. Yeah. Okay. 136, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Yeah, great movie, classic, Stanley Kubrick. You know, bit of an earlier Kubrick film, and a little bit more explicit in some ways. I think that, Kubrick, sardonic guy, cynical guy, and that is embedded in all of his movies, and the subversive thing in all of his films. But in this film, it's kind of the most explicit, satire going on. And so in some ways, that makes it the most accessible. Really cool movie. I like the way that it ends. I think that was a good choice. Peter Sellers, of course, kind of steals the show here. There's some legendary lines that will live on for a long time. So yeah, Dr. Strangelove. I mean, come on, gotta watch it. 135, Wings of Desire, 1987. Wim Wenders, probably my favorite Wim Wenders film. Great score from Laurent Petitgon, or however you pronounce that guy's name. He has a YouTube channel, I think, where he's posted some of his scores, including maybe the ones for this movie. Circus Music is the song they use. Yeah, this is... Wim Wenders is an interesting director, and it's been a long time since I've seen this movie. Maybe we'll bump into something a bit that I've seen more recently, like The American Friend, further up the list. But there's a lot of different things going on here. I think one thing that's interesting about this movie is that if you're not really familiar with Wim Wenders, you're going to maybe think of like, oh, this is an old and like foreign movie, so it's going to be like this sort of stodgy thing, or it's going to be like this really like German thing, or it's going to be this old-fashioned thing. But that's really not the case at all. This is a movie that pulls from a ton of different things, like Nick Cave. It has a bunch of influence here, and like Peter Falk is in the movie. So this is a really sort of metropolitan, cosmopolitan movie in some ways, like reaching out towards a ton of different influences, like all over the place. And that might not be totally obvious at first, or you might be a little bit surprised by that. Angels Over Berlin, an ethereal movie. Yeah, it's been too long since I've seen it, so I can't tell you a whole lot more than that, but beautifully shot film in which Bruno Ganz, is he in this? I think maybe. Anyway, incredible movie. There's a shot in this film of a library that has stuck in my mind for a really long time. Yojimbo is 134. I can't remember if I've seen this, to be honest. If so, it did not make a big impression. I don't think I have. No, maybe I have. Honestly, I don't know. These samurai films kind of all blur together for me. To Be or Not to Be. We talked about this movie already. 133. This movie is from 1942, and it is a comedy about World War II set in Poland in 1939. And set in Warsaw, I think. It's got Jack Benny, of all people, and it's directed by Ernst Lubitsch. Ernst Lubitsch, of course, a huge influence for Billy Wilder. Billy Wilder always talked about the Lubitsch touch, which was this sort of clever and a very efficient way of getting something across, like these really elegant jokes. And this film is full of them. This is a great movie. Really funny, really, really clever. Yeah, it is sort of interesting that it came out during World War II. Maybe if it was made 3 years later, people would not have been making a comedy. I don't know. On the other hand, it does have some like stark moments. Yeah, it is a powerful film. genre bender. I think this is a relatively accessible film these days, and fairly easy to find this one playing in various places, so I would absolutely check it out. 132 is War and Peace, and I assume this is the Sergei Bondarchuk version of this movie. Yep. Yeah, so I've seen this, all 3 parts or whatever. This is you talk about big movies, there's almost nothing that gets bigger than this. Like, wow. The scope of this movie is crazy, crazy. Yeah. This film is beautifully shot. This is sort of the peak of Soviet cinema. I think Bondarchuk had 3 heart attacks when he was making this movie or something like that. At least that's the story. And it's no surprise when you look at it. The scope of it is insane. First of all, the battle scenes. What's the Battle of Borodino or whatever is the main thing in this. I did read War and Peace once upon a time. But the battle scenes, of course, are unprecedented. I mean, there's almost nothing that has the similar, just level number of people in it. Of course, this is way before CGI. They really did this. They really shot off all those cannons. Crazy. And it's awe-inspiring. This movie will blow your mind. But also, even the simpler shots, right? Of course, the ballrooms. I'm not going to call this simple exactly because they have these crazy soirees where it's Natasha's party or whatever. And there's all these people dancing in this beautiful, beautiful old palace. And this movie, I almost think that it would be easier to build a time machine and go back in time to this period than it would be to make the movie as they made it. That's how much effort went into this thing. The costumes, incredible. But even, like I said, even the simplest things, even just the most basic shots, just have a look to them that's kind of unbelievable. Now, there's also a kind of interesting mystical, spiritual element to this film that you might not expect, but I thought was really cool. Finally, I think the movie ends with a really interesting shot where they show one of these fields, one of these places where the battlefields, one of these places where one of the battles took place, and then they fade into the modern times. They do a crossfade into what it looks like now, and it's some highway that runs through it. And it's a beautiful shot that kind of connects the history here to the present, which is interesting because the movie it's almost like watching Star Wars or something. That's how far away and how distant and just how unbelievable in some ways it all is. But then the way that it connects that to today, or not today exactly, but to the 1960s at least, is cool. So like I said, this is probably the greatest Soviet film ever made, and maybe one of the greatest films ever. I mean, it is really, really remarkable. And if you can find the time, I would definitely recommend. Pather Panchali is 130, another Satyajit Ray movie. I don't think I've seen this. In truth, I can't remember which one I have seen. But Ray is cool, Bengali filmmaker. I have a rule not to watch Indian films, not to watch Bollywood films from before the year 2000, but that does not apply to these films, which are cool. Kind of a neorealist vibe. Number 129 is a movie that I hoped we would see. I mentioned earlier, I hope we bump into Funeral Parade of Roses. What a great movie. And it warms my heart that it's on the list, right? This would never in a million years make it on the IMDb list. And then what a stirring endorsement of this here ranking to find such an interesting film. So, man, how do I even describe Funeral Parade of Roses? Let me say, first of all, this is probably the most stylistically dynamic film I've ever seen. Just the most kind of left field movie I've ever seen. I mean, there's sections of this movie that just defy classification completely. There's no movie that I think combines as many techniques as abruptly and as jarringly as Funeral Parade of Roses. Truly an insane movie. So engaging to watch because it's just so dynamic. Also, the plot is kind of wild. This movie is about kind of a reverse Oedipus story about a woman. Man, I can't even remember exactly the details of it, but it's a reverse Oedipal story about a transgender woman who ends up killing her something or other, or I don't know, it sort of blurs together a little bit, but a remarkably poignant film, honestly. Yeah, this movie is so cool. And when I think about Japanese modernism, this is the movie that comes to mind. I think there's nothing that comes close. Well, maybe, I don't know, but I haven't seen anything that comes close to just the insanity on show in this movie. And I'm not just saying, wow, it's cool style just for the sake of it. I think this is also a beautiful and a poignant film, an artistic statement. So yeah, Funeral Parade of Roses. Absolutely worth checking that one out. Next, we have The Sacrifice, Tarkovsky's last film from 1986. Offret, I think it's called, or whatever. A really cool movie. Again, it's hard for me to get too deep into any of his movies here, because they're complicated, and I need to rewatch them again, and I need to really settle into them. But there's a lot that sticks out to me about this film. This is probably the Tarkovsky film that I've seen most recently, although still it's been years and years. And yeah, this is the one with the burning house, not to be confused with the one with the burning barn. That's The Mirror, which I assume we're going to bump into higher up the list. I would suspect that The Mirror is probably going to be the highest rated Tarkovsky film on this list, but we will see. Offret, or The Sacrifice, to me, struck me as being a humble film in some ways, which is interesting for a director's last film. I mean, Tarkovsky was a legend in his own time. Of course, it's not like he'd walk down the street and just be recognized left, right, and center. I mean, he's making like art house films or whatever. So, I'm not sure how recognized he felt exactly, but, clearly he was at the pinnacle of his field. And yet his last movie is so tormented and uncertain. And it's almost unclear if any of this amounts to anything. And that, to me, was poignant. So, yeah, I like this movie. One of my favorite Tarkovsky movies, but hard for me to say much more than that. Bicycle Thieves is 127. This is kind of the iconic neo-noir film, Vittorio De Sica, and, a moving neorealism film. Like I said, I don't know if I need to watch more than 4 or 5 neorealist films. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Suggest me one that's going to blow my mind, and maybe I'll check it out. But Bicycle Thieves is probably the first one that you will have seen. And it's cool. It lives up to the hype, without a doubt. Werkmeister Harmoniac is 126. This is a Bela Tarr film, and this is Hungarian, I think. This is slow cinema at its finest. You'll be hard-pressed to find a more boring movie than this, but it is a cool film. Well, yeah, the only films that are probably more boring would be other films by the same director that are longer. This is one of the few real virtues of this movie, is that it's fewer than 4 hours. But look, this is a cool movie. There's some really poignant images in it. There's a big whale that washes up in the town square in this film. It's the elephant in the room, so to speak. And a powerful image. This is not a super didactic movie, so you're left some room to dissect the whale. There's also an interesting scene where people pretend to be the planets orbiting or something like this. I forget exactly why they do this. They're practicing for their something or other. But yeah, people are orbiting around each other, which is kind of interesting because they're doing it in some bar or whatever in this sort of glum European town. They're doing this celestial and cosmic thing and trying to reckon with the universe. And I think in a lot of ways this film is trying to reckon with the universe in this sort of cloudy, overcast place. Kind of a cosmic movie, but yeah, slow cinema, certainly. The Departed is 125. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this movie. Of course, this is a remake of Infernal Affairs, which I think is a pretty cool movie. The Departed is cool, I guess, but I don't know. This sort of action movie isn't really for me, and I think the ending, once again, isn't very good. Dog Day Afternoon is 124, a real rare John Cazale film. Al Pacino, of course, is the main man here. I saw this movie so long ago. I would need to watch it again, I think, to properly understand this in the context of the 1970s, because at the time, I don't think I really even was aware that the 1970s had existed. But yeah, this is a classic, cool movie. 123 is Good Will Hunting. This is another movie that I think it's not exactly, it's not it for me exactly. I'm not a huge fan of Robin Williams. I mean, good guy, but yeah, I don't find him quite as compelling as a lot of people do. And I also didn't. The cult of what am I trying to say here? This film really relies on these images of genius or whatever. Wow, this is what a really smart guy looks like, or wow, this is what it looks like to be this super genius, and such. And I think a lot of those images are cheesy and not realistic. So I don't know. This movie didn't really do it for me, but 122 is Mommy, the Xavier Dolan film from 2014. This is a really cool movie. This film is largely filmed in a 1-to-1 aspect ratio, and it's about a troubled kid, Jeff, I think is his name. It's got a lot of cool contemporary music in it. Lana Del Rey, Born to Die, I think is the climactic final song. Is that what that song's called? Something like that. This film, Xavier Dolan is a great director. Xavier Dolan. But what has he done lately? I mean, I don't know. But this is probably the pinnacle of his career, I guess. And yeah, it is true that, I don't know, maybe there's some potential that was unfulfilled, or maybe this was just a unexpectedly good movie. But the he has a great mix of like grueling social realism. Like this movie has some really hard to watch scenes, and a lot of it is like really tough to contend with this kid's sort of disconnections with its family. The lack of social harmony that defines this sort of family is really tough to stomach. But he also has a real artistic sensibility and an extremely organic sense of like the energy of youth, and of a certain sort of outsider feeling, and that culminates really beautifully in Mommy. There's a couple ways in which it's maybe a little cheesy. This like montage moment where they show Jeff going through his life is okay. Maybe it's a little cheesy, but look, it worked for me when I watched it, and I would recommend this movie. I think it's pretty darn accessible and moving. And hey, 1-to-1 aspect ratio. That's pretty cool, eh? Okay. Number 121 is A Taste of Cherries. This is an Abbas Kiarostami movie. Kiarostami is a really interesting director. He makes films that tend to be ontologically baffling, as in you ask yourself, what? What even is this? Is this a movie? Wait, I thought you think the movie's one thing, but then he tricks you. Kiarostami is a very tricky director, Iranian filmmaker. And this film, I don't really want to reveal the trick exactly because it sort of spoils the movie, but let me just tell you that this Taste of Cherry seems, for the most part, to be a parable. It seems to be this really traditional film, but that is completely subverted towards the end in just the most like slightly baffling, inventive, clever way. Kiarostami, great director. We'll probably bump into more of his films further up this list. Brief Encounter is 120. This is an example of an earlier David Lean film before he was doing the big epic films. He made some simpler movies. I haven't actually seen this, though, so I'm not going to say anymore. The Great Dictator, 1940, another example of a World War II movie made during World War II. This is a sound film from Charlie Chaplin, and this is a real classic. I mean, this is a great movie. But again, it is interesting to see how people were portraying the events in Germany before maybe the full scope of things was known. M, Fritz Lang, is 118. Yeah, M, I was slightly underwhelmed by. I think it's a great movie, and a significant one. Peter Lorre is really vivid in this film. The balloons going up into the power line is a great little dramatic mechanism in this movie, but I was still sort of underwhelmed when I saw this. I have to watch it again maybe to see if it's grown on me. Okay. 120 or 117, The 400 Blows, one of the most famous films of the French New Wave, directed by Francois Truffaut, of course, starring what's his name as the kid, Antoine Doinel. Yeah, look, a real classic. I think in some ways, people who are coming to the New Wave today, I think Truffaut films might not be as satisfying as some of Godard's films. Well, it depends what you're looking for exactly, but Truffaut's films, in some ways, when you look at them from today, I think they don't seem as extreme. They kind of seem more like just normal movies. And The 400 Blows, yeah, it does not seem like a radical film if you don't have some of the context of the time. Whereas Godard's films, you watch them now, they'll still deliver as like oh, well, that's an art film. Like, what's going on here? Like, why did he do that? That doesn't mean I wouldn't recommend Truffaut. I think that The 400 Blows is a great movie. And actually, it might mean that I would recommend Truffaut over Godard to some people because in some ways it's a lot more accessible. And, you know, you watch this movie, even if you don't have the context exactly of all the New Wave stuff, I think you're still going to empathize a bit with this kid who is kind of a troublemaker, kind of does the wrong things, but also is falls through the cracks in many ways. Beautiful movie. Yeah, this does have a lot of the staples of the new wave. It eschews the happy Hollywood ending. It ditches this sort of inevitability of the creation of the family unit and the happy ending in general. I mean, this film is kind of an example of the opposite of that. In fact, it ends with indecision itself, really. It ends with uncertainty, mainly. This is kind of the opposite of the 1950s Hollywood machine, well, of classic Hollywood. Again, if you don't have the context, I think it's just going to be an endearing, nice, kind of sad movie about a kid. 116 is All That Jazz. This is another one of my all-time favorite movies. I have reviewed All That Jazz on this channel, so I'm not going to go into it in depth too much. But this is just a movie that, man, just feels like the peak of what humans can do. First of all, this is a movie that foregrounds talent. This is a movie about, like, Dancer. It's about a Broadway show. It's about Bob Fosse, and it's directed by Bob Fosse, and it's basically a film, I think, about when he staged Chicago, although it's not, they don't feature any of that stuff from that musical itself in this film, but I think it's understood that it's about when he made Chicago. And this is one of the most interesting sort of autobiographical films you'll ever see, because Bob Fosse just, like, destroys himself in the movie, basically. I mean, he really, really puts himself on blast as an addict, as someone who is, in many ways, pretty unstable, whose life is kind of spiraling out of his control, but who also has this immense creative output and this drive. And yeah, it's a movie that slams together death and creation in ways that almost no other movie does. Totally, like, off-the-wall movie, really slick movie, really compelling, really fun to watch, but also, like, a really, really poignant film, and one that foregrounds, like, so much talent. There's so much great dancing in this movie and just so much cool stuff. Almost an unparalleled film. All That Jazz is, yeah, so cool. I think the ending drags on slightly, but other than that, one of my all-time favorite movies. And yeah, I have a full video about it, so you should check that out. Still Walking, 2008 is 115, and this is another Hirokazu Koreeda film. So this is a film about a family that goes to visit their like grandparents in the countryside, and again, there's some sort of mystery of the family going on. So I won't spoil it. I don't really remember what happens anyway exactly, but it's a family that sort of looks normal from the start, but you start to kind of understand that something transpired. There's some relationship that isn't quite as it seems. There's some way in which this family is makeshift or is covering up something, and you eventually come to understand that. Another incredibly beautiful movie from brilliant director. Psycho is 114, another Hitchcock film. And yeah, look, I mean, Psycho, I don't know if there's much more I can add to this movie because it's quite well known, but I personally enjoy watching this movie. It kind of did in Anthony Perkins' career. He got a bit typecast by this film previously. One of the reasons it works so well, and something that might not be as obvious to modern audiences, is that Anthony Perkins had a history of playing really likable characters, really good guys. And this was a huge reversal of that. He really was playing against type, and you, in some ways, think, well, how could you get typecast by playing against type? Wouldn't that be broadening your horizons? Well, Psycho just turned out, I think, to be so iconic. And such a big film, and his character, Norman Bates, is so vivid in that movie that it sort of changed the course of his career. Anyway, great movie. 113, The Wages of Fear. Well, we already talked about The Wages of Fear when we talked about Sorcerer, and I think they got it about right, putting this one up at 113 and that one down a bit farther. I really like this movie. I think this is the most suspenseful film ever made. The beginning maybe drags a little bit, but really cool film. French movie, but set in South America. Amadeus is 112. I've not seen Amadeus. 111 is Singin' in the Rain, another one of my all-time favorite movies. If you want to know what classic Hollywood is all about, this is it. This is, to me, the pinnacle of classic Hollywood. Another film that features really talented people, Gene Kelly, Donald O'Connor. You know, seeing people just like sing and dance and be skilled and be talented in films. I mean, I'm not using talented in the sense that it's like, you know, you're born with a certain ability or whatever. I don't really believe in that. But just seeing people who are so good at their craft is really inspiring. And, the exuberance of performance, the exuberance of song and dance just comes across in this movie. Singin' in the Rain, believe it or not, was, I think, the 12th movie to use the song Singin' in the Rain. Nonetheless, this is a striking film, really clever movie. I mean, everything came together perfectly. Really talented individuals, a great script, great concept, great movie all around. Like I said, the pinnacle of classic cinema. If you haven't seen Singin' in the Rain, I mean, what are you doing? Go watch it. No Country for Old Men is 110. And speaking of, if you haven't seen this movie, well, I haven't seen this movie. Howl's Moving Castle is 109. What's this guy's name? Hayao Miyazaki. One of his many sort of famous films. I saw this as a kid. I don't really remember that much about it, so I'll skip over that one. Apur Sansar is on this list. I think this is another Satyajit Ray movie. I haven't seen it. 7 is next at 107. We're making some decent progress. We're over halfway through this. So this is Morgan Freeman, Kevin Spacey, Brad Pitt, directed by David Fincher. I think who's the woman? Her head features in this movie. Is it Paltrow? Let me check. Yes. Yeah, this is a classic. I mean, this is a thriller, and this is sort of one of the most iconic thrillers ever made, and it delivers. And yeah, partly it's like really intense, but there's also kind of a game-like self-awareness to this movie that's pretty fun. So this isn't exactly my kind of movie these days, but you can't say 7 isn't a nicely put together thriller. Before Sunrise is 106. These Linklater films, the trilogy, all kind of blurs together for me. It's interesting that these movies still resonate so much with people. People often, like, if I tell people I'm really into movies, it's somewhat common that they'll be like, oh, have you seen Before Sunrise? Yes, is the answer. But yeah, I don't know exactly why this movie is so, like, well-known in these slightly more, like, mainstream circles. Cool movie. I think there's something that feels really authentic about this film, really sort of boots on the ground about this movie. But it's been a long time. I can't say much more than that. Late Spring is 105. This is another Ozu film, and I haven't seen it. I've only seen 2 Ozu films, believe it or not. I watched Tokyo Story long ago, and I remember thinking at the time that I was not old enough to truly appreciate it. So I sort of put the rest of his work on hold, and I could probably unpause it at this point, but haven't gotten around to it yet. The Silence of the Lambs, 104. Another absolutely classic thriller. This movie has so many clever things in it, nice switcheroos. In it, sort of a revival of the career for Anthony Hopkins. Of course, Jodie Foster is incredible. Maybe this film is, like, extremely transphobic. Interesting. But, again, this has got to be one of the all-time, like, great thrillers. Iconic movie, so nicely put together. Does it have anything more to offer than being a thriller? No, but, cool movie. 103. Landscape in the Mist. Theodoros Angelopoulos. I haven't seen this movie. I have reviewed a couple of Angelopoulos films on this channel, including Eternity and a Day, which is unbelievable, and I'm hoping to get to more of his movies soon, including this one. Ordette. Oh, hey, I mentioned Ordette earlier in this video when I said that I often get it mixed up with Winter Light. Ordette is a Carl Theodor Dreyer film about a guy who thinks that he's Jesus, and that's all I remember about it. Black and white movie, kind of vivid looking, Danish. But this movie didn't make a huge impression on me for whatever reason. Paper Moon, 101, Peter Bogdanovich. I don't love Paper Moon, to be totally honest. It's fine, but this movie's a little too happy-go-lucky for me, a little too fun for me. That's just my personal taste. I think I prefer the biting, like, unyielding, rigorous psychological drama like you might find in The Last Picture Show, another Peter Bogdanovich movie, which I think is a lot better than Paper Moon. We'll see if we bump into that. And look at this. We are on to the last page. Only 100 more movies to go. How long have we been here? 2.5 hours. That's not so bad. We're moving through this. Hopefully, these reviews are actually worth it. Of course, now that I've been doing much more extended content, much more like deeper dives on all these movies, offering my off-the-cuff thoughts on these films kind of, I don't know. It doesn't satisfy me that much. I wish I could give you a little bit more, but when you're just going from memory, it's hard to offer as deep of insights as I would like. Okay. An Elephant Standing Still is number 100. I haven't seen this movie, Chinese movie, long, very new, very grim. The director's last work, I think after he made this movie, he died, which is sort of connected to the, sort of maybe plays into the allure of the film in some weird way. But I really would like to watch this movie. I think it checks all the boxes for being a really grim, sad, grueling social realism, but haven't gotten around to it yet. Wild Strawberries. Ingmar Bergman movie, one of the classic Ingmar Bergman movies. If you're gonna watch one, this is the starting points for people. Been a long time since I've seen this movie. I'm not actually like a huge fan of Ingmar Bergman. I think that his movies have this like classicness to them that is like, I'm talking about classic Hollywood inflection that is a little bit uninteresting to me in some ways. I've seen a few of his movies, not anywhere near as many as you might expect. This movie, of course, is a little bit different than some of his later work. It's a little bit more on the metaphysical side of things. Of course, it's a film about memory, the passing of time, things like that. I would like to revisit it at some point. I remember thinking the dream sequence in the beginning with the watch is pretty slick. But this was another movie that maybe I'm not old enough exactly to appreciate, although I think even the youngest of us worry about the passage of time. Number 98 is Army of Shadows, Jean-Pierre Melville. This movie is showing in New York City right now, and I was thinking about going to see it because I've seen it once many years ago, and this movie, this is a good movie. This is a very serious movie. This is a film about the French underground. I think it's probably the best film about the French underground. Had some very intense scenes in it. Yeah, very suspenseful, very intense, but also there's sort of a coolness, the Melville French coolness thing, but there's some other element of poignancy here that I can't exactly put my finger on. This is one that I would rewatch in a heartbeat, even though it has a couple of quite grim moments. The Mirror is number 97. Well, I was guessing that this might be Tarkovsky's highest rated film, but I suspect there might be one more up here. The Mirror is also a film about time and memory in some ways, like Wild Strawberries, but it's pretty abstract. Like all of Tarkovsky's films, they're movies that kind of make their own language, speak their own language, and yet are so deeply poignant, are so kind of abstract and yet so piercing and biting at the same time. In The Mirror, yeah, I think one of the main themes is about time over, it's about a lifetime and how, the passage of time, how sort of disassociative it all is. Of course, there's a famous shot in this movie of a soldier lying down, as I think he throws a grenade or something, and he's lying down and ducking, and you can see the blood pulsing through his forehead in a really visceral way. One of my favorite Tarkovsky films. Again, don't have as much as I'd like to say about it, but I really have to sit with those movies for much longer. Red Beard is 96. I haven't seen this. Three Colors Red is number 95, and here we get to one of my other all-time favorite directors, Krzysztof Kieslowski, who unfortunately died somewhat young. Did not make as many films as he could have, but he made some really cool ones, and the Three Colors trilogy is one of them. I think Three Colors Blue is the best of the trilogy, and Red is the second best. We'll see if we bump into more of these up on the list. Maybe The Double Life of Veronique will be up here too. I don't know. But Three Colors Red is a really cool movie. So the Three Colors trilogy is the colors of the French flag, which are about liberty, equality, liberté, égalité, and charité, or something like that. Which liberty, equality, and charity, or something. I might be completely wrong about that. Anyway, the Three Colors Red focuses a lot on justice. It's partly about a judge, and there's a little bit of a modern inflection here too, because there's some surveillance going on. The judge learned that he can listen in on a bunch of different conversations or something like this. And there's kind of this like this meditation on voyeurism and paternalism in justice, which is interesting. Of course, the other side of things is there's this young woman who I think is a model, who is, the other side of the voyeuristic equation in many ways. The film culminates in a shipwreck, and it's actually, they use the footage from the wreck of the Herald of Free Enterprise, which was a ferry that crashed in the 90s. And a few years ago, I had one of a project I did before I started this YouTube channel was I made a documentary. I made like a video essay about shipwreck documentaries, which is a certain type of documentaries about salvaging ships, and one of them was about salvaging the Herald of Free Enterprise. So I have a pretty weird video essay on my Vimeo page, which you can find on my website, called The Salvage of the Herald of Free Enterprise, which talks some about this movie, because this movie happens to feature the Herald of Free Enterprise at the end of it, which is kind of cool. Anyway, really cool movie. Anything Kieslowski has ever done is worth watching. Before Sunset, that's interesting to me, actually. Oh, no, yeah, okay. I remember I saw Before Midnight in theaters. Before Sunset's from 2004. Yeah, again, these movies completely blend together for me. I don't have much to say here. But 93, All About Eve. Okay, you know what? I said that Singin' in the Rain was the pinnacle of classic Hollywood. Well, the other pinnacle of classic Hollywood is All About Eve. What a great movie. Here's a fun fact. Did you know that Anne Baxter is a descendant of Frank Lloyd Wright? Bet you didn't know that. This movie is so great. So clever, so much back and forth. You know, the whether it's the what's her name? Betty Davis is in this movie or whatever. Demanding people that like play Claire de Lune at one point, and she's like listening to it and waxing poetical about it, and then later it's playing on the radio and she's like, shut that off, I hate fake emotions or something. Tons of great reversals in this movie, tons of great quotes, tons of great characters. A classic storyline of this rise to fame and sort of the usurpers that come along, and the cyclical nature of it. It's a story that has found itself in other movies, a story that has influenced films far and wide, but it's also just a really cool movie to watch. Incredible cast. George Sanders, interesting guy, plays Addison DeWitt. George Sanders was married to Zsa Zsa Gabor and to Zsa Zsa Gabor's sister, Magda Gabor. Interesting. I feel like I probably said some of the exact same things in my past video, because All About Eve also featured on the IMDb Top 250. So let me not dwell for too long on this, but yeah, like I said, one of the pinnacles of classic cinema without a doubt. Okay, City Lights is number 92, and you know what? I don't think I've seen City Lights. Inglourious Bastards is 91, and again, if you want someone as sensitive and subtle and inquisitive and just historically minded as Quentin Tarantino to take a look at World War II, then this is the movie for you. But again, that does not appeal to me at all, so I have never watched this. The Seventh Seal is number 90, and it's interesting to see. It's interesting now that we're getting sort of towards the business end of the list. There's some things that we are starting to see that would be on both lists, which is not too surprising. The Seventh Seal is probably the most accessible. Well, it's the Ingmar Bergman film that everybody watches first. It's about a guy riding around playing a chess game with death. There's a quotation from this movie I remember where he's saying, he's talking to someone at one point. He's saying, I've been feeling a little bit down. And the guy says, oh, why is that? And he says, I just feel like I've been in bad company lately. And the guy says, oh, is it the squire? This is the guy he's been riding with. The guy says, no, with myself. I've always liked that line. But again, this movie, when I watched it, was actually a little underwhelming for me, and it's something I need to revisit. Life is Beautiful is 89, and I have never seen this movie. I'm not a huge fan of films about those aspects of World War II, so there's a lot I have not seen, and that is included. 88 is A Man Escaped. I have seen this movie. This is an escape film about some people escaping from prison. I'm sort of surprised this is all the way up here at 88, because I didn't think this movie was, like, that amazing. But it's cool, I guess. 87, Where is the Friend's House? A movie I have never heard of, all the way up at 87. Oh, it's an Abbas Kiarostami movie. Okay. Well, interesting. I have not seen this. Number 86, Witness for the Prosecution. We already talked about Witness for the Prosecution a little bit. The thing that people said about Witness for the Prosecution is that it was the Billy Wilder movie that everybody thought was an Alfred Hitchcock movie, because it's again a little bit of a departure for Wilder. Of course, Wilder's career was actually pretty varied. He made some of the swinging sort of comedies that were these sort of subversive, usually double entendre filled kind of sexual comedies, like Some Like It Hot, or like 7 Year Itch, although again, that movie kind of sucks. But he also did the noir stuff. He also did like Ace in the Hole, which you talked about earlier, which is much more of sort of a classic thing, right? But he also made movies like Witness for the Prosecution. So yeah, this is a Marlene Dietrich film. Tyrone Power is in it, I think. Charles Laughton, there we go. Charles Laughton. That's the guy who directed the now I can't remember the movie he directed. When I was reviewing that movie, I couldn't remember who he was. But no, The Night of the Hunter, Charles Laughton. Anyway, yeah, Witness for the Prosecution is a classic courtroom drama sort of twist movie. They really hyped up the incredible plot twist in this movie. When you went to see test screenings, you had to sign something that would swear you would not reveal the secret of Witness for the Prosecution. And I think it's actually somewhat common to have to sign like NDAs when you go to like screenings or whatever, at least now. I suspect that part of this was actually marketing. They really wanted to hype up this idea of a twist. And this might still be on the list of movies with great twists you'll never see coming alongside Fight Club. But it is a little bit predictable these days, I think. Still, this is a pretty fun movie. All the way up here to 86 is a little bit surprising. I think some of the movies below it, like Double Indemnity, for instance, are better. I'm a little bit surprised it's rated this high. That might be a common rejoinder for the rest of the video. We will see. Number 85 is The Thing, a John Carpenter movie starring no women, although there is a woman's voice on a computer, I think. Classic horror movie. This has got really great like gore special effects in it. The thing about The Thing, one thing well, let me say a few things. First of all, when I was a kid, I remember reading through some plot summaries of some horror movies because I thought, I'm never going to watch these movies. They're too terrifying. I'll never watch that. It's so scary. It's the scariest movie ever. Of course, this was really silly. I should not have done this because all those movies that I thought I would never watch, I watched every single one of them, right? And I kind of wish that I didn't know what was going on. Now, The Thing is pretty formulaic, and I didn't remember like the individual details of it, so I don't think I really doomed myself. But I would just say, man, never read the plot summary of a movie. Never. You just never know. But one thing about The Thing is that I feel like you almost get a little bit desensitized to the gore. I feel like I said the exact same thing in my IMDb Top 250 video. But you end up seeing The Thing quite a bit, like the monster. And it is like horrifying and kind of shocking. But you kind of get used to it in some ways. Still, this is a cool movie that's still pretty frightening today. Number 84 is Interstellar. Yeah, I haven't seen this movie. Number 83 is Eternity and a Day. I mentioned this earlier, Theodoros Angelopoulos. This is an amazing movie. I mean, this is a truly great movie. And this is what I'm talking about. Movies, to me, the greatest thing you can do in cinema is not make a movie that everyone's going to like. It's to make a movie that very few people will like, but that is a transcendental thing. It's just says something that cannot be said in any other way, right? The greatest movies say something that cannot be understood in any other way, can't be written out. And this movie does that. So, of course, it's going to be a little bit of a struggle to summarize. But fortunately, you know what? I have a whole video about this movie, so you should go check that out. This film, yeah, Angelopoulos movies are slowly paced. They usually take a while to get off the ground. At first, you think, why am I watching this? You got to sit through a little bit. But they have very striking visuals, usually. And as you get towards the end, as you start to learn the language of the movie, as you start to enter the dramatic space, this is when the magic starts to happen. And in this movie, there's a couple of sort of landmark scenes in particular. The whole first half of the movie, I don't even really remember. Like, it doesn't stick out to me much. There is sort of an interesting thing at the very beginning about this. This guy lives in an apartment, and he plays these records each day, and his neighbor, who he's never met, always plays the same record across the street. Aw. That's kind of interesting. Some idea about harmony in life or whatever. This movie is like this metaphysical thing, but it's also really grounded in politics. It's a movie about an aging Greek poet who meets this young Albanian kid who's like separated from his parents and can't get back to Albania. So almost all of Angeloupoulos' films are really, like I said, metaphysical, spiritual almost, uncovering these like almost mythological stories, like the long history of Greece, talking about these old Greek poets or about mythology, but also they're really bound up in present day politics, which is an interesting thing. But yeah, there's this movie for me starts getting good when they reach the Albanian border, and the shot of the Albanian border is just unbelievable. And it's hard to explain why it's so moving, but it just looks like when you're looking over into Albania, it's just like this land of ghosts almost. It's so foreboding. And, you know, this is supposed to be sort of a happy time when bringing this kid back home, but it's like the entrance to the underworld in some ways, which, you know, nothing against Albania, although, well, whatever. Nothing against Albania, but that shot is when the movie starts to enter this other world, and just becomes amazing. And then, yeah, there's the most famous part of this movie is probably at the end. There's a long bus ride with this kid and the poet are riding on the bus together, and through Greece somewhere, and all these people just start getting on the bus. Some musicians get on the bus, some students get on the bus, and something about this scene, even just thinking about it, it is so moving and so powerful, even though it's just like a bus. Truly a great movie from a great director. Eternity and a Day. Nobody Knows is number 82, and this is also Hirokazu Koreeda. This is one of his most famous movies. This is not exactly my favorite film of his. It's from 2004, so it's one of his older films, although actually Koreeda had a period in his career before this movie, before he really found his groove of making these serious social dramas, usually involving families and kids. Before he did that, he made some other movies like, what's the one, Afterlife? Or whatever. He has some earlier work. But when we talk about the main period of Koreeda's career, which is still going on, Nobody Knows is one of the early ones. It's one of the films that's most widely known, but I don't think it's actually the best. And in some ways, it's one of the ones that's, in some ways, the most extreme, and in some ways, the most simple. It's just about a family whose like mother just leaves one day, and the kids have to look after themselves. And it's, in some ways, like a tearjerker, like grim movie, but there's also a really beautiful angle of resiliency here, sort of. This is a sad movie. And like I said, to me, I think it's a little bit more simplistic than some of his other films. And I'm hoping that we still bump into Like Father, Like Son further up, because I think that is the best movie. But yeah, Nobody Knows, another movie from Hirokazu Koreeda. And it's, man, it warms my heart to see him all over this list, because I do think he's an incredible director. Lawrence of Arabia is 81. Been a long time since I saw Lawrence of Arabia. That movie struck me as being kind of dated. I'd be curious to watch it now and see what I think of it. Of course, it has this iconic energy to it, the big cut of the lighter to the sun and all this stuff. Huge cast. And there is this like legendary nature of it. And it's interesting to think about how it cultivates that legend as a movie. Of course, there's maybe some fishiness here of like, it's treating this like, you know, this legend is a foreign reality or something like that. And of course, there's a lot of white actors playing Arab characters, which is a little interesting. So I don't know if it exactly stands up to time, but I think this film, yeah, I remember thinking that this movie seemed kind of like an artifact of the time. When did this come out? 1962. But I'd have to watch it again to be sure. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Oh, beautiful movie. What a great movie. Another classic of American cinema. The 1970s, to me, is the greatest era in American film by far, and possibly in American culture. Who knows? I wasn't there, but the movies from this period, incredible. And look, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was a mainstream movie, right? People like to point out when I say, oh, I don't really like these Marvel movies, they like to say, well, but there were always popular movies. And that is absolutely true. And there were all kinds of goofy sequels from back in the day. There were like 13 Ma and Pa Kettle movies, right? But look, in the 1970s, there were a lot of amazing movies that were the big movies, you know? And of course, not all of them. There were crappy movies from all eras, and there were cheesy mainstream movies in all eras. But films like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest make you realize that, man, things have things have changed. Incredible movie. Pretty cool book, too. Yeah, you've probably seen it, so let's get to some of the more interesting ones. Scenes from a Marriage, 79. Yep, I have a video about this. Scenes from a Marriage, in some ways, I thought would be my ultimate film because it is kind of the pinnacle of... This is an Ingmar Bergman movie, by the way. I thought it would be sort of the pinnacle of this like grueling social drama that I'm so interested in. But it didn't quite do it for me. It is a great movie. It is a great movie. It was a television program first that was joined into a film, and that shows a little bit. It is in some ways a very simple film. It is moving, but it again has a little bit of a classical inflection to it that felt slightly more artificial than I had expected, which is something I've noticed in a couple of these like Bergman social dramas, is they do feel like they have some sort of classic inflection in there that for me, again, just slightly got in the way. Still, cool movie, but I didn't like it quite as much as I thought I would. Okay, A Separation. Oh yeah, and like I said, I have a full video about it, so if you think that's nonsense, just go check out my full video and angrily comment there. Okay, A Separation. Asghar Farhadi directed this movie, Iranian film from the 2011, I guess. This is a cool movie. Asghar Farhadi has made some good stuff. I'm curious if haven't heard much about this guy recently, but this is a movie about a marriage falling apart. It starts out with someone picking up their spouse from the airport, and they're trying to communicate with each other from two sides of a glass wall, and what follows is basically a grueling social drama. The ending of this movie is interesting. I won't say more than that. 77 is Satan Tango. Satan Tango? I've never known exactly how to say this. And this is the really long Bellatar movie. So if you thought that Werkmeister Harmonies was too boring, well, this is the movie for you because it's like 7 hours long or something like this. The description of this movie, well, let's see what they say on Letterboxd. Nah, this is too long, not reading that. Anyway, yeah, this movie is, does it say the length? 432 minutes. About the length of this here video. So, no, this is a movie that I will probably never be able to bring myself to watch, but seems interesting in theory. Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring is 76. Yeah, cool movie. I don't have much to say about this. One thing I will mention that I think is a little bit interesting in Lord of the Rings is that the Lord of the Rings books were a big deal. I mean, look, maybe this is obvious, but they were a big deal like in the 1960s. And I think one thing that's kind of cool about this, I just like this fact that that Led Zeppelin song, Immigrant Song, has, I think that's the one of their songs, has lyrics about the Lord of the Rings in it, in a Led Zeppelin song from the 70s. That's an interesting little chronology busting fact in some ways, because most people, I think of the Lord of the Rings as like this new phenomena or whatever. But no, these were famous books a long time ago. Love Exposure is number 75. Sion Sono directed this, I think. Something like this. This is a Japanese movie, totally unhinged movie, 4-hour-long movie. This movie is like 90% trash, 10% like vibes, and yet it somehow is really good. Like, I really like this movie. It is, yeah, it's really trashy. It's about like some kid who's like a ninja upskirt photographer or whatever. Like his great passion in life is like taking pictures under people's skirts, and his dad is like a corrupt priest or something, and then he like sort of starts falling in love with his like sister. Well, not really a sister, but anyway, and then he pretends to be a woman, and okay, I can't explain the plot of this movie without sounding like an absolute lunatic. And the movie is lunacy. I mean, it's crazy. It's a totally off-the-wall movie, but somehow this is a profound movie, I think. The vibes are immaculate, but there's something deeper here, too. Yeah, the music in this movie is so good, but yeah, there's something deeper here. I think this movie probably gets the award for the longest you have to wait before the title sequence happens, right? And I mean, The Departed is a pretty good example of that, because The Departed, you wait like 20 minutes before they show the titles. But in this movie, it's like you wait, I feel like it's like 45 minutes into the movie, they show the opening titles, and you're like, what the heck? Like, did you forget? Like, what's going on here? But really cool, totally unhinged movie. Love Exposure, yeah, great movie. Sherlock Jr. 74. Haven't seen this. Knights of Cabiria is 73. Interesting. This is a Fellini movie. I've seen this about this guy Oscar, the con man. I'm surprised that this is 73. I don't think it's like this is above Dolce Vita and 8.5. Interesting. The Pianist is 72. I haven't seen this movie. Princess Mononoke is 71. And this blurs together with all the other Hayao Miyazaki movies. I'm not sure I've seen it. 70 is I Am Cuba, Soy Cuba, which is a Soviet film. I have a video about this movie. This is a really cool movie directed by Mikhail Kalatozov. I have a couple of videos about Mikhail Kalatozov movies. The other one is The Red Tent. Two really cool movies. Soy Cuba is... Wow, what a cool movie. I mean, it's famous for a couple of really long tracking shots that will, like, blow your mind. Because it came out in, like, 1964. It's filmed in Cuba. You're like, how did they... It's like, looks like they have a drone to make this thing. Or it looks like they have one of those, like, gimbals that was invented in, like, 2011. But nope, they just had a really elaborate use of, like, tracks and a bunch of camera operators. And they do some truly bonkers tracking shots that hold their own with movies that come out today. But this movie is not just about the technical achievement. This is a really vivid example of a genre that, like, is not very big. Like this, sort of Soviet political art film. So this is a Soviet movie, but it's filmed in Cuba. Obviously, you can probably guess the connection there. Two communist places. And this is a film that is, in some ways, communist propaganda. It's not exactly clear to me how Cubans would feel about this movie, how authentic they would think it is. But it is, in some ways, like, I mean, they went there. They filmed the movie there. It's sort of inarguably authentic in some regards. At least, those are what places looked like. There's an artistic element to this film that is really striking. A combination of a lot of different techniques. It actually reminds me a little bit of some Japanese movies in some of the really striking expressionistic cinematography that they use in some of the segments. This movie is in a couple of different parts. This movie is like watching a movie from just another planet. It's like the pinnacle of a genre of one, I think is what the thumbnail for my video about it says. But I won't ramble on about it. I'd probably do a much better probably do a better job of explaining this in my video about it, so I would go check that out. Number 69, nice, is Rear Window. Hitchcock movie probably does not need a super extended explanation, but one thing I'll mention about some of these Hitchcock movies of this time is that these were films that to some degree were intended to be for the whole family. So it's interesting to see some comedic relief sneak into these Hitchcock films that are, in many ways, we think of them as like thrillers, although these days they're not exactly. These days we probably think of them as classic movies, but they're kind of thrillers. But they actually had some in some ways stuff for everybody. Okay, 68. It's Such a Beautiful Day. Oh, I haven't seen this, but this is this Don Hertzfeldt thing. Yeah, I don't know about this. The Ascent, 67. Wow, this is punching pretty high on this list. This is a woman director. Does The Ascent. This is a movie about some soldiers stumbling around in the snow, and then there's a biblical moment. And this is directed by the woman who was married to the guy who directed Come and See, which we might see further up the list. I'm a little surprised this is so high on the list. This movie did not do it for me, exactly, but it's kind of cool. Once Upon a Time in the West is number 66, and this is a Sergio Leone film. This is a film that he made in Hollywood, although parts of it were still shot in Spain, so it's somewhat famous for having the longest carriage ride in the world because it has parts of it that are shot in the plains of Spain, like the spaghetti westerns often were, and part of it that was shot in Monument Valley. This might be somewhat jarring if you've been to Utah and know what things look like, but if not, you might not notice. This film is, it's great. I mean, Sergio Leone is great. I'm not going to dwell too much on these ones that overlap both lists, but yeah, Claudia Cardinale is here. Probably what I said about this on the Top 250 video is that people might not realize when they watch like the Dollars trilogy how much Sergio Leone was pushing the envelope in terms of violence. You'll notice a little bit when you watch Once Upon a Time in the West because this is a pretty violent film. Interesting going against casting in this movie, great score from Ennio Morricone, and that's Once Upon a Time in the West. 65 is Old Boy, and it's the remake of Old Boy. No, just kidding. That's not on the list. From 2003, Park Chan-wook. I have seen every Park Chan-wook movie, every single one. Well, is that true? I've seen almost all of them. Maybe there's some early ones or something, but Old Boy, of course, is a really striking movie. Yes, it is a grindhouse movie, which is sort of not my thing these days, but there's also a way in which Park Chan-wook just fiddles with the dials inside your brain in a way that not many directors do. He can make films that are twisted and visceral and poignant, but also like gripping and really stylish and really, engaging. 64, It's a Wonderful Life. Well, Frank Capra, an all-time classic. I don't know if I have a ton to say about this movie, but of course it's cool. The Red Shoes is number 63, and this, I suspect, is the highest rated film from the Archers on this list, which makes sense. So this is Michael Powell, Emmerich Pressburger, and this is a film about a ballerina and some legendary pair of red shoes, which once you put them on cannot be removed. It's kind of a deal with the devil type thing. It's sort of this mythological idea, but it's also a film that's really grounded in sort of a classical cinema in some way. So cool combination, and again, really cool special effects, and they've got a lot of great dancing in this movie. So the Red Shoes, definitely worth checking out. A Woman Under the Influence. I had a feeling this would probably be the highest rated Cassavetes film. I don't think this is quite as good as the Killing of a Chinese Bookie or Opening Night, but it's probably the most well-known Cassavetes film out there. This movie maybe runs afoul a little bit of like certain modern day, well, there's some interference being run by certain like modern day gender politics in this movie. Some people might be confused by what exactly this is supposed to be getting across. But hey, great movie, I think. Gina Rowlands again, and is Peter Falk the husband in this movie? That doesn't seem right. Let's see. No, it is. Okay. And Peter Falk and John Cassavetes were really good friends. And actually, John Cassavetes appears in an episode of Columbo. I think he plays a composer or something like that. Okay, Sancho the Bailiff is number 61. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't remember which one is Ugetsu and which one is Sancho the Bailiff. And I've seen one of them, so refer back to what I said there. But again, I think sort of near-realistic, but also Japanese samurai film. Interesting stuff. Okay, Paris, Texas is 60. And yeah, Paris, Texas is another Wim Wenders film. Now, it'll be interesting as we get up to the top of the list to see which Wim Wenders film is numero uno. Paris, Texas is probably one of the best known Wim Wenders films because it's a Hollywood film and it has like Harry Dean Stanton in it. And look, don't get me wrong, great movie. I don't remember really anything about it, so I'm not going to be able to say much insightful about it, but I'm hoping we'll see some other Wim Wenders stuff further up the list because I don't think that this is the best movie. Or yeah, there's at least two movies. Well, no, I think Wings of Desire is better, but I also think The American Friend is better, and I think one of the greatest films of all time is directed by Wim Wenders and may or may not feature further up, but we'll see. 59, Barry Lyndon. Ooh, we're closing in, boys. So Barry Lyndon, of course, is another Kubrick film, and this is a really beautifully shot movie. It's got this watercolor effect to it. It's impossible to argue that Barry Lyndon isn't really cool, but I do kind of feel like the plot isn't quite what it could be. Like, they do all this effort to make this crazy historical movie and to make it look so darn cool, but the story, for me, was just a little anticlimactic and underwhelming, I guess. 58, Perfect Blue, and I told you, this is my favorite anime film, and here it is. This is a film about, like, what's the term? A woman in a singing group, like a girl group. Idol, there we go. An idol who has a bit of an identity crisis / stalking issues. This film is quite explicit. I watched this with my grandmother. If you've seen this movie, you'll realize, wow, what a horrible choice that was. But I didn't know. Anyway, Perfect Blue, like I said, my favorite anime film. Really cool. Another Lord of the Rings movie up here. Which one is this? And The Two Towers. Yeah, I don't have much more to add to this. The Battle of Algiers, Gio Pontecorvo is up here at 56. Yeah, cool movie. It's got this really like gritty documentary feel to it. It feels like an insider movie. Like you're really on the ground doing this revolutionary thing. Still, I don't know. I'd have to watch this again, but I don't know. It doesn't linger in my memory the way that some of these other movies do. In the Mood for Love, number 55, and this is surely one of the greatest films ever made. Probably Wong Kar-wai's greatest movie. One of the most subtle films ever made. Yeah, there's a lot I could say about this. Maybe I should do a video about In the Mood for Love one of these days. There's a lot of style things here that are cool. The dresses. I think the subtlety is really the main virtue of this movie. And I don't know, I'm selling it short, but I don't have a lot more to say than that. Do the Right Thing is 54. I saw Do the Right Thing a number of years ago. I was a little underwhelmed by it, but it's cool. Brash movie in some ways. A movie that's made on its own terms. 53. Oh, this is a Star Wars. The Empire Strikes Back. Well, I think many people consider this to be the best Star Wars film. It's interesting that we haven't seen any of the new ones on this list, thank goodness. But they probably are making their way up the IMDb Top 250. Yeah, I don't have a lot to say about the Star Wars films. Of course, I went through a Star Wars phase as a child, but I'm not too interested in it now. And I saw the first new one, and I'm not going to watch any of the other ones. The Cranes Are Flying is number 52. This is a Mikhail Kalatozov film. Again, same guy who directed Soy Kuba and The Red Tent. I haven't seen this movie. This is on the list for the channel in the near future, but haven't gotten around to it yet. The Handmaiden is 51. Park Chan-wook. This is probably my favorite movie of his. Incredible movie. NC-17, sort of an erotic film. But man, you talk about him. First of all, this is a movie that's a little bit less of a grindhouse movie, a little bit less violent, although it is still quite twisted. But a deeply beautiful movie and a deeply twisted movie too. And I think this is an example of where entering the erotic aspect of a film can greatly boost a movie. It can take things to the next level completely. And yeah, The Handmaiden, for a while, was one of my favorite movies. Yeah. My favorite Park Chan-wook movie, which is saying a lot. Probably my favorite Korean film. Persona is 50. Oh, and this makes sense. This is probably the highest rated Bergman movie, maybe. I've never seen Persona, actually. Incendie is next. I mentioned this already. Denis Villeneuve, one of his earlier films. This is a cool movie. It is a little bit in your face, but yeah, it's a sort of a refugee story. People trying to hunt down their father or something like that. Pretty cool movie. Oh, I should stop saying we're not going to have more Bergman movies. Anyway, Memories of Murder is number 48, and this is probably my second favorite Korean film. This is Bong Joon-ho, guy who directed Parasite, but this was his movie from the 2000s. This came out in, 2003. And you got some of the same legendary Korean actors in it. This is, I think, again, this is a textbook thriller. Like, if you want a good thriller, go watch Memories of Murder. There's few that are better. Intense movie, some really clever scenes in it. They determine, like, oh, this killer always strikes when it's raining and when they're playing the same song on the radio, and the police are sitting in the office and they hear the song come up on the radio and they look out the window and it's raining, and then it hard cut to a woman walking down the street, and you know this person always targets women, and you're like, Some great narrative devices in it. Really intense movie. Just the characters that are just the right amount, that have just the right amount of complexity. I've said before that some movies try to make characters that are a little bit too well-rounded, and you can lose sight of that in a movie sometimes. If you have a character from a book in a movie, sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. But here you have relatively simplistic characters, but they both have pretty dynamic arcs, which is cool. I think they get the balance right. Memories of Murder, really cool movie. 47, Fanny and Alexander. This is another Ingmar Bergman movie, and I think I've seen part of this, but as a child, I have no comment on it. The Human Condition, Part 2, Road to Eternity, number 46. I haven't seen any of the Human Condition movies. I really would like to watch them someday. One of my friends has watched them and endorses them strongly, and I would trust him with my cinematic life, but they're so long. You know, I got a life, so hopefully one of these days I can watch them and maybe even do a video about it. But that's another puzzle because, you know, there's 3 of them, so do I do a video about each one? I mean, that takes I don't know. So hopefully I'll get to those at some point. Close Up is 45, so this is an Abbas Kiarostami movie, and this movie is like, talk about ontologically baffling. This is a movie about a guy who pretends to be a director, and it's funny because the director he's impersonating, I think it's Mohsen Makhmalbaf that he impersonates, who is a cool director, has some cool movies out there, which I don't think we'll see on this list, but maybe. It's a real guy, right? So it's about a guy impersonating a real guy. So already you're sort of breaking some of the rules of the cinematic worlds in some ways, because in a lot of movies it's sort of is almost like Hollywood doesn't even exist, or like the film industry doesn't really even exist in the movie, because of course it'd be a bit weird if inside of a movie you went to Hollywood and you found the director who made this movie and he was working on the movie, right? There are films that break the rules here where, you know, there'll be a movie where, for instance, in Badlands, people keep telling Martin Sheen that he looks a bit like James Dean, right? Okay, interesting. So there are films that break the rules here, but this one, wow, smashes them open because it has this guy impersonating another director. Anyway, he goes to a family and tells them he wants to make a documentary about them. And they oblige, and yeah, it's a really shrewd, clever movie about the act of filming, right? The act of looking, what a camera is actually doing. Later on, there's some courtroom scenes that are just, they're great because they're so baffling, because they transit the line between like a documentary and a like a fictional film in a way that is just really the Kiarostami special of just like, you kind of want to just be like, dude, what are you doing? Like, why did you make the movie like this? Because it seems like, oh yeah, like narrative film, but then it's like, what, like this, that, huh? Like, if this is a documentary, but then it sort of switches back and it really keeps you guessing. But again, Kiarostami, the master of ontologically baffling film, and Close Up is a really fun example of that. 44, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Obviously, I have not seen that. Number 43, Mishima, Life in 4 Chapters. This is a Paul Schrader movie. I've never seen this movie, actually, but I'm kind of curious about it. And number 42 is a film about a man with a very large head. Of course, it is Stalker, one of the most famous Tarkovsky films. In this movie, Tarkovsky is maybe coping a little bit with the nuclear heritage of the Soviet Union. They go into this zone place. I mean, it's an internal journey, kind of this journey of like self-discovery or whatever, that's sort of a journey into the self, but also sort of a journey into the Soviet wilderness or something. Again, for all these Tarkovsky ones, I'd have to sit with it to say much more than that. Oh, I see we have another one coming up before too long as well. The next film, 41, is Whiplash. Now, in my first Top 250 video, I went on an extended tangent about Whiplash. Unfortunately, I went on that tangent while discussing the movie Spotlight. Whoops. But I eventually caught the mistake, and I almost thought about restarting the video, but I couldn't bring myself to do that. So, yeah, no secret. I think Whiplash is a terrible movie, basically. Not terrible, but I think Damien Chazelle is a really immature director, making pretty goofy movies, La La Land included. I don't think we'll see that on this list. But yeah, I don't think, you know, that movie is contending with this this question of like, well, like, do you need assholes in your life, or do you need like, how do you, you know, there's this music teacher is really going to push you. Okay, are you going to be able to? Is he going to get you to new heights? How do you contend with these like really fiery and intense individuals who are really going to like push you super hard? But yeah, I just think that whole mythology is just completely silly, and I think the film, yeah, I'm not saying that I'm not saying it needs to take like a moralistic position about all this, but I think that movie is remarkably naive, and I think that Damien Chazelle, it's everything I've seen that he's done has just been remarkably naive. So not a fan of Whiplash, but look, I understand it's gripping, it has a lot of style, it has some narrative devices, the music elements in it are kind of cool, but nah, not for me. Andrei Rublev is number 40, and this is interesting to see this Tarkovsky film so high up the list. Andrei Rublev, in my mind, is not one of Tarkovsky's most bewitching films. I think it's a little bit more accessible. I mean, it's a movie that actually kind of has a plot about some people building a bell, sort of. I forget exactly all the ins and outs. But it's more of a historical film. It's more of a straightforward historical film than some of his later work. I think it's the most accessible Tarkovsky film, and maybe that's why it's so high up the list. I'm not exactly sure, but I don't think it's the best one by any means. Number 39 is Portrait of a Lady on Fire. I was planning to do a video about this, actually. I watched this movie last year, maybe, but I never got around to it. I think this is a good movie. I think it's mainly a good romance, though. I think it's got a really compelling love story at the center of it that's beautifully shot, beautifully put together. I think it's a little thin on making a deeper artistic statement than that, but I think it's a great romantic film. This is another case of like people making a 1970s movies in like, when did this come out? 2019 or whatever. 2019. People trying to make a movie from the 1970s in 2019 and like doing a pretty good job, but also you realize like, man, we're pretty rusty at like making actual art films. But hey, still a really compelling movie. And like I said, I think it's a great love story. Okay. 38, The Passion of Joan of Arc. Cool movie. Movie with a lot of close-ups. This is another Carl Theodor Dreyer film, right? Let me double check that. Yes, it is. And, this is a silent film that is maybe a little slow for some people. And I'm not sure I would recommend it super widely, but it's poignant, man. And I mean, what people always talk about is all the close-ups in the movie. So you see a ton of shots framed like this, and that has an effect. I mean, it's a pretty jarring thing to watch. It's also just this movie about a woman on trial in a way that I think will resonate with people even today. This film also really has some long tendrils out into the cinematic universe. I mean, there's that My Life to Lead, Vivre sa vie by Godard has this movie in it. That's like the most explicit citation of the film. But I think this idea of like a woman on trial, a woman against everybody, is one of the reasons why Joan of Arc sort of, martyrdom, I guess is what you would call that. But yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why Joan of Arc, her story resonates with people. But I think that's still kind of poignant today. 37 is Tokyo Story. And I guess I already talked about Tokyo Story a little bit. I said, well, I didn't think I was old enough to watch it. And yeah, I don't have a lot more to add on that. I sort of have to take a mulligan on this movie and come back around to it, I think. I hope to really discover Ozu in a profound way later, but I haven't exactly yet. The Apartment is 36. Man, we are getting close. Man, this is going to be a short video. This is great. 36 is The Apartment. This is a Billy Wilder film. Again, huge fan of Billy Wilder. And The Apartment is easily one of its best movies. 1960, this won Best Picture. It beat Psycho. Jack Lemmon is in it, and Shirley MacLaine plays Fran Kubelik. It's her character. She's an elevator attendant, and absolutely charming, incredibly clever movie, really snappy, really fun. I mean, this is a movie I would recommend to anybody, anytime. Fred McMurray, again, great cast, great movie. I don't have much more to say about it than that. Number 35. Oh, it's another Billy Wilder film, Sunset Boulevard. I think The Apartment is better than Sunset Boulevard. I think Sunset Boulevard I think it's great, but I think it's kind of a meta film in some ways. It's a film about classic Hollywood, and I'm not sure that modern audiences will know exactly what's up here, but absolutely iconic movie. I'm ready for my close-up. And a film that is technically not like the first meta Hollywood film, but I think this movie really stoked the fires for a lot of films about films that came later, like The Bad and the Beautiful, things like that. Sunset Boulevard, kind of the original fizzling star film in some ways, and the real classic feel. I mean, open it up with the guy in the pool, and yeah, what a great movie. But I think The Apartment's better. Apocalypse Now, number 34. Yeah, famously, well, not famously, but I'm not a huge fan of Apocalypse Now, but I haven't seen it in a long time. I should probably give this movie a second chance. But in general, I'm not a huge fan of Coppola. And yeah, I don't know. This movie's okay, but I think some of the stuff that people say about it, they get a bit carried away. This movie just to me felt really tropey. Oh, look, it's the guys on the boat. Like the classic war movie Regiment. We've got the guy from Pittsburgh. We've got the black guy. We've got the guy from, Detroit. We've got Max Klinger from Toledo, Ohio. that's a pretty toothless criticism of what is a very broad film, and what I suspect I would actually like if I watched it again, but I'm not sure. So I need to revisit. 33. Gosh, what is this? Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse? Yeah, I haven't seen that. Paths of Glory is number 32. This is from 1957, and this is a Stanley Kubrick movie, an earlier Kubrick movie, and I think a worse movie than the Kubrick movies we've already talked about. But we'll see what's coming up. Decent movie. Thought the ending was a bit dragged out. It's a pretty short movie. Dune is 31. I haven't seen this. Woman in the Dunes, ironically, is number 30. This is I have seen this movie, but so long ago. I remember almost nothing about it. It's a metaphysical film, sort of this big extended metaphor about this guy or this woman who's living in a desert, like inside of a big hole, and sand always keeps like falling down or something. That's all I got. That's all I remember. Lettrue is 29. We talked about A Man Escaped a while back. A Man Escaped and Lettrue, however you say this, I cannot separate those in my head. These are two like escape films, and I could not tell you the difference. Between them, I'm surprised to see this so high up the list. Actually, I'm surprised to see Woman in the Dunes so high up the list too. Who directed this? Maybe I just watched it so long ago I missed the significance. We have seen a lot of Japanese movies on this list though, which is, Japan makes good movies, but maybe slightly overrepresented on Letterboxd. I'm not sure. Maybe a lot of people use this website in Japan. I don't know. Spirited Away. Oh, another Japanese movie is next. And again, this is a Hayao Miyazaki movie that sort of blends with all the other ones for me. I know that's sacrilegious to say because these are maybe sacred to a lot of people. Big childhood staple, but not for me. There Will Be Blood is number 27. I haven't seen this. I haven't seen No Country for Old Men or There Will Be Blood. Wait, no, I have seen No Country for Old Men. Oh, shoot. Okay, those two I get kind of mixed up because they both came out at the same time. I remember when they came out. Of course, I was young. This was 2007, so I was like 10 or 11 years old or something like that. But I remember hearing on the radio about these movies when they came out. And I have not seen There Will Be Blood. I have seen No Country for Old Men. That's the Coen Brothers one with Javier Bardem. And I didn't think it was that great. But Grave of the Fireflies is 26, another Japanese movie. And this film is not your classic childhood feel-good Hayao Miyazaki film. This is a really grueling, gritty film about World War II. Some people say this is the saddest movie ever made. I don't know about that. This movie was a little underwhelming to me. It is grim, but I don't know. I think that it's pretty common for people to go through an extremophile phase in cinema where they want to watch the saddest thing. They want to watch the most violent thing. They want to watch the most, you know? And it's easy to think that, like, the most must be the best, right? I think that's a phase for a lot of people. And I think you can grow out of it a little bit. And The Grave of the Fireflies is in some ways, I think, a movie that sort of... I don't mean to belittle the content in some ways because it is a, profound tragedy that it is about, and obviously, that's not something to scoff at. But I do think the movie, in some ways, caters to this like extremophile thing in some ways, and I'm not saying that they made the movie to be that way, but it sort of has become this like hallmark, almost this like, oh, have you seen that movie, kind of thing. And I don't know, I'm not that interested in it. When I actually watched it, I just tried to set all this stuff aside, and I think it's a good movie, but it's not the most subtle thing. Out there. And also, honestly, I feel like, I don't know, the thing about like these extreme movies is that if you really brace yourself for this stuff, then you can survive, and I don't know. So I think it's a little overrated, but oh well. Cinema Paradiso, number 25, all-time great movie, in my opinion. Giuseppe Tornatore directed this one. Ennio Morricone score. I think this is one of the greatest film scores of all time, and one of the greatest movies of all time. Nostalgia is what this is all about. And this is sort of a new Italian cinema thing. This movie's from the 80s, late 80s. And it's interesting how it's kind of using a lot of the sort of nostalgia for Fellini in some ways, but it's not a Fellini-esque film in a lot of ways. And that's sort of interesting. In some ways, it's kind of a fake little genre, sort of. And there are a couple movies that imitate this in a way that I think is pretty facile. But Cinema Paradiso, let's face it, great movie. The end of this movie is one of the greatest endings of any film in history. I think beautiful film, moving, nostalgic. Autumn Sonata is number 24. I have seen this movie, Ingmar Bergman. And again, this movie was one that for me had this classic inflection to it that I don't know. I didn't enjoy that much, but it's a cool movie. It's about a Swedish piano teacher pianist going out to her mother's house or something, and then she has a complicated relationship with her mother or something like this. There's a lot of arguing in the movie, which sounds exactly like my kind of thing. That sounds like it's right up my alley. But in fact, this movie, like I said, has this sort of artifice in it that I felt there was not the intimacy that I had expected or something like that. So it didn't quite do it for me, but cool movie. Okay, we've got another anime film. Time for me to try to say this thing again. Neon Genesis Evangelion. The end of that thing. Yeah, I haven't seen this. 22, The Dark Knight. Cool movie. I've actually been watching some of the Batman stuff, like the original Batman show with Adam West on recently. And I gotta say, what a great show. It's a complicated thing. I remember watching it a little bit in the past and being really bamboozled by it because it's so the word that I reached for in the past was campy. I wouldn't exactly use that word now, although I think it is, but that's not the main way I would describe it. But yeah, I just was so confused in the past. I saw videos of the Batusi or whatever, and you're just like, what the heck were they doing? People, it's so weird and goofy. Okay, the Batman television show was a comedy, right? I mean, it was for kids and adults both, and for kids maybe it was this fun adventure thing, but it was a comedy and a satire sort of this mainstream thing. And once you can wrap your head around a little bit more if you actually watch some of the stuff, but there's some great moments. I think a moment that really sums up the show in some ways is when Batman and Robin are climbing up or no, they're on some ledge and Robin gets pushed off, but he catches a rope in his teeth and he is able to hang on. He catches his body weight with his teeth and hangs on, and he's able to climb back up. And he gets to the top, and Batman says, "Robin, dental hygiene is very important. See?" or something like that. And just this the absurdist mainstreamism of it, just how strangely wholesome Batman is, always doing the right thing, always being as fair and as just as possible, and embodying the American way and apple pie as much as possible, but to this absurd degree. Pretty cool stuff. I'm now actually slightly curious about how Batman evolved through the years, because clearly the new stuff is not like that at all. I think some of the movies, like the movie in the 80s that is much maligned, I think had a little bit of an identity crisis because it wasn't sure what to do with this TV show that was so goofy and so, yeah, it was a comedy. And, if you think about it, adapting comic books into live action, I think it makes sense that the original television show was so goofy because, these things were comic books. Now, I know, I'm not saying all comics are, funny or whatever, but I'm saying adapting this into a live action thing is, weird. And keep in mind, there was no precedent for doing this, really, at the time. Or not much of a precedent, at least. So, you watch that show, and it's they have the kablam, the kaboingo things that, pop up, and you think, what is going on? But actually, there's something kind of profound about this adaptation of the comic book into live action, maintaining some really goofy artifice in it and being a pretty outlandish thing overall, because that's what the source material was. Okay, the 1980s ones, which I haven't seen, but I'm sort of curious about it now. I might do a video on it sometime. I think probably those were sort of doomed because they didn't know what to do with the show's identity, right? You have a comic book, then you have a goofy television show, then you have these, then you're trying to make a movie. Didn't really come off. Okay. Eventually, we get to the Christopher Nolan thing, and he basically completely changes the script on this and makes a serious Batman movie. Now, let's be clear. The Dark Knight is a children's movie. Nothing against that. I really like this movie when I was growing up. I think it's a cool movie, clever, really clever. I mean, Christopher Nolan, I'm not a huge fan, but you can't say that he isn't clever. It doesn't make interesting. Yeah, it doesn't make clever movies. That's cool stuff, but also, he probably set in motion a trend that has just completely destroyed modern cinema. So, thanks a lot. But that was maybe Iron Man 2 that really got things going. But the rise of serious superhero films is something that today it seems totally natural, well, of course we have these movies, these Batman movies that are really gritty and serious and such. But if you rewind the tape, it's what? No, that's not guaranteed at all. And in fact, we've ended up in some situation that is, in some ways, if you take a step back and you look at why are these guys running around in tights fighting crime, it is extremely outlandish. And yet it has reached this sort of level of acceptance in modern culture. Okay, very different approach than what the television show did. All comes from Christopher Nolan, probably. Okay. Whew. Goodfellas, number 21. I just did a video on Casino recently. Worth checking out. The video, maybe not the movie. And I talked some about Goodfellas. It's been a while since I've seen Goodfellas. And again, the slander that I raised against Scorsese earlier on about being ambivalent towards cruelty and violence completely applies to this movie. The anticlimactic ending completely applies to this movie. And yet, I have to admit that Goodfellas is pretty cool. Maybe cool is not the right word, because again, it's the cool factor that I think is all the danger of this stuff. Because like, no, this stuff, and I'm not trying to be like the Dare program here, being like, oh, drugs aren't cool. This isn't cool. That's not it exactly. But there is a powerful sense of insider stuff here, being in the know, cool stuff. You can go watch my video about Casino where I really dissect what this means and how Scorsese often has this like insider thing going on where you want to learn about this like hidden stuff, and he's telling you all these like insider secrets, right? And how that actually, in many ways, mirrors the reality of like gambling in Vegas, which is what Casino is about, or about being in the mob, where it is sort of all about knowing things, all about knowing people and knowing about how power really works, right? But then also seeing how these sort of secret societies break down, seeing how business and crime may or may not mix, right? And seeing how these sort of less formal societies can have problems, and seeing how the feds eventually come and start unraveling this stuff. So anyway, go check out the video. Number 20, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Yeah, I mean, look, one of the greatest movies ever made, probably. What a great movie. I don't have a ton to say about this other than, well, let me celebrate one thing, which is Sergio Leone's work as sort of a buddy comedy guy. Not comedy exactly, but I like how episodic a lot of his movies are, where they take us through a lot of different things. You think like, okay, well, I'm almost done with, I think you could complain that The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is too long. Like, there are some pretty drawn-out parts. Oh, they're rambling around in the desert, right? But one thing I really like is that you go through some episode, it's like, okay, you've almost reached the conclusion. Great, they're almost free. And then it's like, oh, wait a second, they've ridden up to some enemy soldiers, and they get arrested and go to Andersonville, right? Betterville is what it's called in the film, but Andersonville is what it's based on. Anyway, I really like that episodic nature of it. It's common in a lot of Sergio Leone movies, and that also couples nicely with this like buddy thing, where it's like these two guys going through all this stuff, all these like thrills and spills of their lives, going back and forth. I think that's a fun mechanic, and you sort of feel it in a certain way, and yeah, the movie kind of builds up this logic of like, whoa, where are they going to go next? But of course, the music, the characters are just so iconic in this movie. The ending is great. I mean, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly delivers completely on its legendary status. What a great movie. Okay, number 19, A Brighter Summer Day. Here's how you know we're on Letterboxd, because this film is, I think one of the greatest movies ever made, like top 2, maybe. I mean, this is an unreal, unbelievably good movie. I got to watch it again and do a full video on it. Of course, it's 5 hours long, so I've been putting it off. But it does come to theaters in New York somewhat frequently, so maybe I'll see it one of these days. This, of course, is directed by Edward Yang, one of my cinematic heroes. Edward Yang, the founder, one of the co-founders of Taiwanese New Cinema, but he studied originally to be an engineer, and he lived in Seattle, Washington, not too far away from where I was born. And he worked there, and it wasn't until he happened to see Werner Herzog's Akira, The Wrath of God in theaters that he thought, you know what, I shouldn't be an engineer. I should go back to Taiwan and make movies. And he proceeded to make some of the greatest films of all time. Unfortunately, he died pretty young, I think in 2005. But Edward Yang, truly one of my heroes. And A Brighter Summer Day is maybe not my favorite Edward Yang movie, which is EE, a movie that has completely changed my life. Maybe we'll bump into it further up the list. I hope so. Oh, in fact, yes, we will. But A Brighter Summer Day is, I think, a better movie, and I truly think it's one of the greatest films ever made. This is a film about kids growing up in Taiwan, but although the movie completely focuses on kids, it's really about adults, and it's really about all the social conditions that they're growing up in, the fractured state of government, and how that is reflected in the sort of like gangs that the kids are a part of. Of course, it's only a somewhat, I don't want to talk about the film only in these like historical and intellectual terms, because it's also just a beautiful movie about childhood, nostalgic film, vibrant film. Oh, man. Unparalleled. What a great movie. Number 18, Ron. Kira Kurosawa made a movie in the 80s. Did you know that? Well, I haven't seen it, so I've got no comment on it. A Human Condition 1, No Greater Love. Well, I already mentioned that I haven't seen any of these, and they're too long to watch. Number 16, The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. I got nothing to add here. Number 15, we're really getting to the business end here. I'm curious to see what is number one. Like I said, I haven't looked at this list in years. I don't know what we're coming up on. There's a few movies that I really love that I hope we see, but we'll see. Number 15, La Haine, The Hate. I haven't seen this movie. I've heard it's good. I don't know about it being number 15. Number 14, well, is Ikiru, the Akira Kurosawa movie. I've seen this movie. I think it's good, but I think this is another case of a classic film that you've already seen, even before you've seen it. And when I watched this movie, I was totally underwhelmed. And I would not rate this anywhere near the 14th best movie. But it is what it is. Okay movie, I think, in terms of watching it now. But, yeah, I don't know. Iconic. Schindler's List is 13. I haven't seen Schindler's List, so no comment there. City of God is 12. Man, it's been a long time since I've seen City of God, but this is a fair movie to put right up at the top. This is a really slick film, but really gritty film as well, capturing life in a favela in Rio, basically. I'd have to watch it again to decide if there's like a lot of meaning to this movie, if it's doing anything more than being kind of a gritty, like, film. Like, what kind of view of poverty does it give us? I don't know. It's been too long since I've seen it. But, widely held as a great movie. Number 11, Yi. One of my favorite films of all time. My other favorite film is not on this list. Oh well. But I would have been very surprised to see it. Yeah, I have a video about Yi from fairly recently. I would go watch that, but this movie completely changed my cinematic life, basically. And all this talk about like, oh, I like serious psychological drama, I like grueling social drama, all this stuff. That's because of this movie and one other. They completely shifted my perspective from liking originally like heist movies, clever movies. Then I got into these like classical clockwork films / serious social dramas. Like I liked it when movies would take really complex social things and boil them down into like one like parable. Like that's exactly what Judgment at Nuremberg does, for instance. So then I went through that phase, and then I discovered Yi, and that has started the chapter that I'm still writing to this day. Incredible movie. I don't even know where to start with this movie. I mean, it's a film about urban life. Film about life. There's no movie that has more life in it than this one. Yeah. What a great movie. Anyway, check out my full video on that one if you're curious, but I guess 11 is fine for this one. Okay, into the top 10. Number 10, The Godfather. I maybe mentioned this in my top 250 video, but I watched The Godfather when I was in high school. I was a freshman in high school, and my film obsession had begun, and it was the last day of tryouts for my high school soccer team, and I'd made the varsity team as a freshman, which was a somewhat significant achievement, and it was celebration time. So we got some Indian food from our favorite local restaurant, Curry Corner, great place, and we were like, okay, we're going to watch a great movie. So I'm like, okay, I teed up The Godfather. And we watched it, and I was totally disappointed. And, I don't know. I'd have to watch it again. I haven't seen it since then. I have seen The Godfather Part 2. I watched that in college for a course. And I thought, this is pretty good. And it made me think, maybe I should watch The Godfather again. Obviously an iconic movie. Obviously a super significant film. Part of the story away from the production code, right? In the 40s and 50s, you couldn't have movies where criminals were victorious. Well, The Godfather is all about the criminal underworld. And I think it's sort of the last step in the shift away from the production code. Maybe something like Bonnie and Clyde was another stepping stone in between those. So yeah, hugely influential movie, hugely iconic, but maybe it suffers a little bit from the you've already seen it syndrome, where, yeah, there've been so many movies now about the mob, about the mafia, and if you've seen those, you've kind of got some of the pictures here. And you have to, I think, be a little bit invested in the legend of The Godfather to really enjoy it. But look, it is a legendary movie, and yeah. What more can you say? Number 9 is The Shawshank Redemption. Well, The Shawshank Redemption is another film that just has taken on a life of its own as a legendary movie, and it is, without a doubt, a great movie. I need to watch it again to really form my full opinion about this. Yeah, a legendary film almost defines what it means to be a good film in some ways. Very accessible movie, the right balance of heartwarming moments, clever moments, brutal moments, intense stuff. You know, I was saying I watched Heat as one of my first R-rated movies. Just The Shawshank Redemption came next. And I remember thinking that, like, Heat is so visceral, it made me think all R-rated movies had to be, like, sad and intense. And when I watched The Shawshank Redemption, it was like, I was like, what? But I might be curious to dive into this one a little bit more deeply, watch it again, and try to understand the sort of iconic language of the film, like Morgan Freeman's character, Red, in this film. What made it catch fire so much? I don't know. I'd like to think about that more deeply. But, hey, we're almost done. Let's just get through this. Parasite is number 8. Okay, I mentioned Parasite already. Yeah, I think this is a good movie. It really warmed my heart when this movie got the traction that it did, when it got people interested in foreign films. This movie has a lot going on in it. It's got class, dynamics going on. It's got some really... It's sort of got something for everyone. It's got some really tough metaphors in it. Like, there's that philosopher's stone that they have that they used to, like, bash someone's skull in or something. And, like, that's interesting. That's a tough metaphor to latch onto. That's pretty cool that that's in the movie. It's got a lot of stuff, but the one thing it does not have is subtlety. And like I said, I would pick Shoplifters any day of the week over this one, but I understand most people probably won't feel like that. So, hey, Parasite, cool movie. You know, I actually saw Parasite in theaters in New York, and Jung Boon-ho, Song Kang-ho, and the woman who plays the daughter were there at the screening, which is pretty cool. They're real people. They were wearing very expensive-looking clothing. Number 7 is The Human Condition 3. So again, I haven't seen these, but it makes me think I should watch them. Number 6, now we're really getting up here. Number 6 is High and Low. And this is my favorite Akira Kurosawa film. Like I said, I'm not a huge samurai movie guy. I don't know why. I think for some reason, those movies just feel a little bit disconnected from my life. It's a little hard to empathize with. They feel a little stodgy in a certain way, or I don't know, they just feel a little bit... There's a certain type of escapism that I'm not, like, super... doesn't exactly click for me in those movies, always. That's not to say I don't like any of them, but it was really a breath of fresh air for me to find High and Low. There's also The Bad Sleep Well, which is sort of a similar movie, but High and Low is a lot better. And yeah, this is a great movie. I mean, it's a police procedural, but so well put together. A black and white movie with one moment of color. A film that... It's interesting because you think of Kurosawa as being such a traditional director, but this has some real modern flair in it, really great use of music. At times, it really is a stylish film in a way that I don't quite expect from him. I mean, obviously, he's obviously a very stylish director, but in a certain way for most of his career. And this film throws out a lot of that, but man, what a great movie, High and Low. Really cool ensemble staging in this film, some interesting moral dilemmas in it. This is about a kidnapping. The police trying to track down a kidnapper. And I won't spoil some things, but there's some great twists in this movie. Great procedural. Okay, into the top 5. And number 5 is The Godfather, Part 3. No, just kidding. It's Part 2, which it's interesting that's rated higher than The Godfather. Like I said, I watched this in college, and I still was not blown away, but I did think it was better than I had remembered The Godfather being. I don't have a lot more to add to that. Number 4, Seven Samurai. Yeah, I mean, legendary movie. This movie didn't do much for me when I watched it. I thought it was kind of boring. Sacrilege. I know. But like I said, the samurai stuff has never exactly been my cup of tea. We continue to have Japanese films all over this list, which again it's not a bad thing. Japan has produced a lot of great movies, but I do think it's slightly overrepresented on Letterboxd. Number 3, 12 Angry Men. These are sort of the usual suspects for top movies, so I'm not going to ramble about them too much. But 12 Angry Men is a classic. Sidney Lumet, I guess, directed this. Henry Fonda is in it. This really will deliver on like the feeling of a classic film. But honestly, I wouldn't rate this movie over like many of the classic films that we've talked about earlier. And I think, again, this is a movie that has really taken on a life of its own as like great movie, classic movie. And there's nothing wrong with that. But this movie has become really legendary. And again, I don't totally understand why. I mean, obviously it's a good movie. But like I said, I wouldn't rate it higher than some other classic films. But it has taken on this extra thing. And I don't think that that's some weird coincidence. I mean, maybe it just is. Maybe there's some fluke of history that led this to being promoted in a certain way at a certain time or something. I'm curious about trying to investigate that somehow. I don't really know how I would. But also, I think there's something about the movie itself, Henry Fonda's role in it maybe, that really lends itself to being a classic. Actually, what I think is probably the virtue of this movie that people latch onto is the momentum of the plot, right? It's a very simple concept in some ways, a trial, okay. But you see, just the way it moves, you know what I mean? The momentum starting to gather. You know where they're going to get. It feels like, man, well, we're a long way from there now. There's no way we're going to reach this place. And then things start to move, things start to thaw, and okay, we're going. And I think that feeling is really emblematic of classic films in general. I think that's one of the things that people really latch onto with 12 Angry Men. Number 2, I was wondering if this movie might come up. I mentioned it already. It's Come and See. Now, I don't think this is the second greatest movie ever made, but it is a great movie. This is one of the best war movies out there. This is a Russian film about World War II, about a kid who finds a rifle on a beach or something like that and joins some regiment. And this is a terrifying movie. And it's a film that I think does justice to the... I'm not going to say the horrors of war, because that's such an overused term, but it's a film that makes it sink in how scary it is to be a soldier. There's a scene, for instance, where there's like an air raid, and this guy's in the forest with a girl that he's bumped into, and they're dropping like bombs all over them, and you really just get the sense that, like, man, where do you go? Like, you run this way? Well, but these things could fall anywhere at any time, and it's just like a sense of terror that I have not found in many other films, even though there's a lot of war movies that have all kinds of violence and all kinds of atrocities in them. And in some ways, Come and See is doing the intensity game too. It's just like, let's just make it as violent as we can and just dial it up even more. But I think there is a nuance to this movie as well. But it is extremely brutal as well. The brutal parts are not my favorite things about this movie, but I think there's nuance to it. Come and See, one of the all-time war movies. And number 1, well, this is absolutely not what I would put at number 1, but it is Harakiri, which is a film by Kobayashi, which is another samurai movie. And yeah, I mean, this is a fine movie, but this is kind of a weird list. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, the main thing that sticks out to me about this film, like the only thing I really remember about this movie, well, let me not say that. I remember this movie pretty well, but the only thing that sticks out to me about this movie is that it was filmed with the Shojiku Grand Scope, which is a sort of antiquated anamorphic lens that creates a ton of distortion. And there's a ton of panning back and forth in this movie that causes really, really glaring distortion as they like pan across stuff. It makes it look like they filmed the movie with a spoon, right? That's the main thing that stuck out to me about this movie. Cool movie, but I don't know why this is... Okay. Well, okay. Look, guys, we did it. I hope this was interesting. I feel like a lot of these points were rushed. But look, in some ways easier than I expected to get through these films. This list is interesting. I mean, it really warms my heart to see a lot of cool movies on this. Still, there are things that I would put on my top 250 that are not here. There are things I would put in my top 10 that weren't on the list anywhere. For instance, I mentioned that Wim Wenders film. Well, it's Until the End of the World. I think that's one of the greatest movies ever made. And yeah, it's not on the list at all. No problem. like I said, I think the Japanese films may be a little bit overrepresented. A lot of anime on here. That's fine. Not too many movies that annoyed me to see, but a couple. In general, a decent list. The ordering of it is weird, though, and I think that's one thing that maybe the IMDb list, even though the user base is different and it's much more of a mainstream thing, I do think that the list order is a little more coherent than with this. Harakiri being number one is really weird. So I don't know, but this movie I think in general has more good movies on it, and more sophisticated films, and more films for cinephiles on it. But yeah, there's maybe a certain coherency that the IMDb list has where it's doing a slightly weird mainstream thing, but you kind of makes sense. And this list is a little bit more chaotic, I suppose. But I don't know. Don't read too deeply into it. I'm sure these things change to some extent, and maybe next week it'll be 250 different movies, although I doubt it. Anyway, like I said, if there's a film on here that you couldn't believe that I haven't seen, let me know, and maybe I'll check it out and make a video about it. That is it for now.